Samantha, you'll let me know when we're ready to start.
Yep, in 1 minute. Is it 6:00? We're ready to start.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Ms. LaRue.
Hi, Miss Ola. Is there a way to check settings, y'all?
Yes, hold on.
The doorbell thing?
That beeping is annoying.
Hmm? Okay, so while Samantha works to turn the doorbell off, good evening, everybody. Happy Tuesday.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. I'm hearing some feedback, so I'm gonna just mute a couple of microphones here just to get rid of the feedback. All right, good evening, everybody again. Happy Tuesday. My name is Leah LaRue. I'm the Assistant Director of Neighborhood Planning for the City of Atlanta's Department of City Planning, Office of the Commissioner. I am joined tonight by my team, Samantha Terry, who is our NPU University Registrar.
Everybody.
And Tony McNeil is our Neighborhood Engagement Planner.
Good evening, everyone.
And Daniel Vasquez, our NPU Program Coordinator. I know many of you already know most of the folks on our team. So definitely want to welcome you to our fourth and final parliamentary procedures class for this year. This class is called Membership Has Its Privileges, and it's designed to empower NPU members to participate fully in the NPU process and the neighborhood associations as well. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We do ask that everyone keep their microphones off at all times unless you are called on to speak or to ask or answer a question. And the reason for that, of course, is not that we don't want to hear from you. It is just that there is often background noise and feedback that you may not even realize your microphone is picking up on, and it makes it difficult for others to hear the actual speaker. If you would like to raise your hand, you can do so if you have a question or are answering a question. Ooh, that is going to drive me nuts. You can raise your hand by clicking on reactions at the bottom of your screen. And if you click on reactions at the very bottom of that box that pops up, you'll see a button that says raise hand. It is a little yellow hand like this, and it says raise hand. Now be cautious. Above that are a bunch of different reactions. There's a laughing reaction, there's a thumbs up reaction, and all kinds of other reactions. You don't want to click those to raise your hand, but you can click them if you want to react to something. So make sure you're raising your hand by clicking the raise hand button. And of course, as is the policy for all of our NPU University classes, please make sure that all questions are relevant to course content. We do not entertain questions that are not relevant to the content that is being taught in the class, especially now, political season, but that is our policy year round anyway. All right, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, for those of you that are here for the first time, I want to try to focus long enough to tell you a little bit about NPU University. We were founded in 2019. Okay, hold on one second, y'all. Does that mean that we can't fix it? It can't be fixed?
Not during
Not during the meeting.
yeah, not during the meeting once it
It's
starts.
just turned off, but the meeting had already started, so it can be fixed.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, so we were founded in 2019, and mostly this was so that we could provide the community with education and empowerment, and hopefully to create a little bit of equity as well. We wanted to make sure that NPUs that don't have all the tools that other NPUs have, at least have access to those tools and can be empowered to use those tools. So we created NPU University so that we could offer classes and training that would help NPU members participate in the process and equip NPU leaders as well. This class in particular is one that many people don't realize that they need, but they certainly do need parliamentary procedures, especially for those that have issues in their NPUs. I am so sorry about that doorbell. You cannot, I can't apologize enough. I'm so sorry. But for those of you that have problems in your NPUs and you come to me or you come to someone on our team and you're like, fix this problem, fix this issue, the members are doing XYZ or the chairperson is doing ABC. And I tell you, some of you in the room know this, I tell you there are 4 sources of governance for your NPU. That's going to be your bylaws, the code of ordinances, the guidelines, the ethical guidelines for NPU officers, and Robert's Rules of Order, or whatever your rule of order is for your NPU. And most people aren't satisfied with that answer and begin to think that we're not doing a good job at supporting the NPUs when nothing could be further from the truth. We do everything that we can to support you all, but there are certain things that we cannot do, but you can do them. You're empowered to do them. However, what we've realized very quickly is that if you don't know how to use your power, then you can't use your power. If you don't realize the tools that you have in your hand with parliamentary procedure, then you can't work those tools. So this class tonight is, again, our 4th and final parliamentary procedures class for this year. And indeed, you are being taught by the best of the best, and you will learn how to participate in your NPU in a manner that is fair and equitable and just. Real quickly, before I introduce our presenter for tonight, the last thing that I want to do is tell you a little bit about what we're doing differently next year for NPU University. This year, we offered approximately 25 classes. I think is our norm. We have somewhere between 20 and 25 classes that we produce each and every year. Thanks certainly to our amazing team that somehow finds a way to pull it off in between doing everything else that they do for the city of Atlanta. But next year, what we will be doing is very different. We are offering Samantha may have to correct me here. We're offering a citizen planner certificate. Is that right? Yeah, thank you. Citizen Planner Certificate Program. And we will have 4 tracks that you can choose from. You'll have to take a number of classes in each track. And once you've done that, you will receive certification from the city of Atlanta as a certified citizen planner. So all of the classes next year will be similar to what they are this year. You will still be able to take them as you see fit, a la carte. You can choose whichever classes you want. But if you want to gain the certification, you'll have to do whatever the program says, a number of classes in each track. Ms. Wilson, can you hear me clearly? Was that note for me? You can just nod, yes or no.
It was not for you.
Okay.
It's just in general.
Okay, I think it's because of the doorbell thing. It makes a sound and it kind of throws things off, but everyone else's mics are muted. So if there's a sound problem, it's going to be my mic for now. But that's it. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over with great pleasure to Dennis Conway, who is a registered parliamentarian and also serves as the parliamentarian to the Atlanta City Council. He has provided some very thorough advice to us whenever we have questions of parliamentary procedure, whenever there are conflicts that are a little bit above our heads. We seek Dennis's professional advice and he gives it to us very graciously. So you are in the hands of Dennis Conway. Thank you, Dennis.
Leah, thank you so much. And thank you for the privilege of being able to come and teach these courses. I thoroughly enjoy it. This is really something I look forward to because in these classes, everyone is very interested in the content and we always have a really nice time. And I appreciate that. And then I just want to say it's been great working with your leadership, the folks that are working for the Department of City Planning and trying to help the NPUs. Good folks to work with, smart, and they know their stuff. And full disclosure, it only took me $15 to have Leah say all those nice things about me. So it was a fair deal, I guess. One of the things before we got started tonight, Daniel and Tony and I and Samantha were talking a little bit. And one of the things that I think will be helpful for you as an NPU member to realize, and Leah talked about some of this already, and Leah or anybody else help me out if I'm misunderstood or if I get a little bit something wrong. Each NPU is an independent entity on its own. It is an organization all on its own to govern itself. Okay, so that's very, very important. You are as an NPU, you are a mini republic. What I mean by that, you're a democratic republic. What I mean by that, in most cases now, I believe there may be one or two NPUs that are structured just a little bit differently, but the bylaws that I've read, it's been described to me that most of the NPUs are set up this way. The membership chooses the leadership, and the leadership does their job providing the leadership that they've been appointed to do by the voting members. What that does is that puts the membership as a voting body, ultimately having the last say in the organization. So that's very important. But again, to stress before you get started in some of the details here, you have the Department of City Planning to help and advise. You have classes that they're doing, and I think it's great what Atlanta is doing for the NPUs in that regard. And I'm honored to be a part of that to help provide for you the information and the tools that you will need to govern yourselves. But that's the operative phrasing. You govern yourselves. The best we can do is to try to teach you how that works, okay, and some of the details and so on. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to, and it's going to sound kind of different perhaps, but we're just going to talk about basic parliamentary procedure. And perhaps you've been with me before in one of these classes and we've done that. And you're thinking, well, this is just going to be a bunch of review. What good is that going to do me? Well, yes, it is going to be some review, but the reason we're doing it this way, and the reason actually it's my decision, the reason I've chosen to do it this way with this question in mind, in other words, how can we as a membership govern ourselves effectively so that we have our way? The reason I'm doing it this way is because if you don't know procedure, then you really don't know what your rights are. If you don't know proper procedure and what you can do and can't do as a member, according to Robert's Rules of Order, according to the bylaws, according to the code, according to the rules that are in place, if you don't know what those are, then you're shooting in the dark. And it very well may be that you have in your mind, well, I'm a member, I'm a voting member, and I should, it's our NPU and we should be able to have our way. Well, yes, unless the rules say that what you're trying to do is wrong. So that's why I think it's best to go this direction right up front. I believe that you were handed some paperwork, some worksheets, and perhaps these are familiar to you if you've been in one of these classes before. At the top of the worksheet, it says main, subsidiary and privileged motions. Now, again, this is familiar to you if you've been here before, but what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk about these things from a different perspective. And the further we get on into this, the more we're going to stress the rights and privileges and the responsibility of the voting membership.
Dennis, real quick, I want to let everyone know those were sent out via email, but it's also in the chat if you need to access it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Smith. So your chart says main subsidiary privilege motions. What this is the basic motions. And there are two other charts that I have in your handouts. And if we can't get through this whole thing, like at about, I think we're scheduled to do a 3-hour session. If we can't get through by about 8:15 or 8:30, I'm just going to jump straight ahead and I'm going to get to the very last point, because the very last point is going to talk about serious action to take if the voting body isn't able to call the shots. Okay, so we're going to work up toward that, and if we are running out of time, I'll jump right there before we do run out of time. On your chart, you're going to see at the bottom it says there's a main motion. There's 13 motions here that are basic motions, and it works from the bottom. You see main motion, postpone indefinitely, amend, and so on. And so we'll talk about those motions. What you'll also see up at the top is the words interrupt, second, debate, amend, vote, and reconsider. For any given motion that you're going to move, you have to understand whether or not you can interrupt somebody. And on this chart with two of them, you can. Whether or not you can interrupt somebody, whether or not it needs a second, whether or not it's debatable, amendable, whether it requires a majority vote or a 2/3 vote, and whether or not you can reconsider it. That's what you have to understand before you make a motion, before you move a particular proposal. For example, if you move the previous question, which is I call the question, you've probably heard somebody say that before, and you want to talk about it, well, you can. It's not debatable. If you look at that motion, you'll see that you can't interrupt to make that motion because there's no I under interrupt. It does require a second, and it's not debatable, it's not amendable, and it requires a 2/3 vote. So that's just one example about, and it can be reconsidered. That's just one example about what these rules mean regarding a particular motion. And it's important to know, because if you think you're doing the right thing, and again, we're talking about members' rights and members' responsibilities. If you think you're doing the right thing, and the chair and the parliamentarian, they know the rules, and they say, no, I'm sorry, that's out of order. Or maybe they're not that kind, I don't know, but they say you're out of order, and that's unfortunate. The motion's out of order, not you. But they say the motion's out of order, and you say, I can make this motion, I know my rights. Well, maybe you don't know them as well as you think. So it's important to know these particular rules on a given motion that you want to propose. So let's talk about, and I'll pause at intervals throughout this presentation to see if there are any questions, because I'm going to say a lot, and then when I do, that's a lot to keep up with, and take notes if you have the paperwork and if you can. And then, so it is a lot to keep up with, and what I'll do is I'll try to provide those times when you can check and see if there's something that I needed to cover again, or you didn't understand something. So main motions, that's the one at the very, very bottom. Main motions. Let's talk about the main motions for a little bit. This is on page, I'm looking at the chart, and then we're on page 2 of the handouts. And you'll see on the handouts halfway down, it says main motion. An original main motion is a motion that introduces a substantive question as a new subject. Now, I use these handouts with various groups. And what I typically do, and most people relate to this, what I typically do is I talk about examples like I move that we purchase a van as an organization. I work with a lot of nonprofits, or I move that we remodel the office. And most organizations can relate to those kind of proposals. I believe it was last year sometime I was using these proposals, these examples, if you will, for one of these classes And it wasn't easy to relate to for an NPU because an NPU isn't dealing with that kind of stuff. And so I've adjusted a little bit. I've got it written down. I mean, I've got it typed out on your handout, but maybe I can use a couple other examples. For example, maybe there's a liquor license that a resident or a business, perhaps not a resident, but a business might want in your NPU, and you have to determine whether or not you want to recommend to the city to grant that. Or maybe there's a rezoning issue that's coming up, and you have to listen and discuss it, and you're going to vote yay or nay on whether or not you're going to recommend to the city to grant that. Well, that would be a main motion. That would be a main motion. Only one main motion at a time. That's all that can be provided. If somebody has moved and seconded that an organization wants a liquor license, you want to approve that. Now you're discussing that. In the middle of that, someone cannot make the motion to say, well, on the corner over here down the street, I think that needs to be rezoned. So I move that that's going to be rezoned. Now, let me admit to you right up front, I've been to 3 NPU meetings. When I first got started with the Department of City Planning to do training with the NPUs, I went to 3 NPU meetings, and I had some thoughts and some recommendations and so on. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because I'm going to be a little bit naive when it comes to the things that you have to deal with as an NPU regarding liquor licenses, regarding zoning, regarding other things that you may have to deal with. So I guess what I'll ask from you is to be kind of patient with me, and just, if I say something stupid about a liquor license question or something like that, cut me a little slack, because you all deal with this a lot more than I do. I'm just trying to relate to your concerns as you move forward. So I am a bit naive when it comes to the content of what you have to deal with. A motion may not be absurd or illegal. And one example I came up with in my own mind, I would have to expect that in most cases, most every case, NPU L cannot make a decision for NPU D. It just can't do that. The organization has to decide for itself. It can't decide for another organization. So if you're a member of NPU L and you say, I move that we make NPU D do such and such, well, that's absurd. It's not legal. And so it would be out of order. So these are important things, because if you don't know what's out of order and you get called as presenting something that's out of order, it's confusing. And you might think that you're being mistreated. You might think that you're being unjustly shut down. But the chair would have every right and even responsibility to call the motion out of order if you're providing a main motion on top of another main motion, or if you try to provide a main motion that's absurd or illegal. One of the examples I use for nonprofits often is that if they've got a contract and they're leasing the office space, and the lease says you can't do any physical changes to this property, and then somebody makes a motion and says, we want to remodel, I move that we remodel the office space. Well, that's illegal because the contract states otherwise. So those are just some examples. You can't just, there are motions that are truly not legitimate. A main motion becomes official when the chair states it. In other words, it's not before the body until the chair states the motion. And that's important because sometimes folks don't word something properly, or something is out of order and the chair has to make that call. And so when somebody makes a motion and it's seconded, you want to start talking about it right away, and the chair should know this. If they don't, they need to read a little bit. They need to state the motion to the body and then call on folks as they may want to talk about it. If it's worded a little different, and I've done this before, if it's worded kind of clumsily and I didn't understand it, and somebody, others are kind of looking at you funny, like, what did he just say? And then you can tailor it a little bit. Now, do you mean this? Is this what you mean? And so on. Yeah, that's what I mean. Okay. And then the chair would state the motion. So if that kind of thing happens, if the chairperson is having to help you and work with you a little bit on the wording of the proposal, that's appropriate and that's right. Okay. Now, if you insist, no, this is my wording, this is the wording I want, they are obligated to follow your wording, even if they think it's a little clumsy. That doesn't matter. That's your proposal. So when you're looking at this chart, let me stop right there. Let's just stop right there. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I don't see any indicators. So when you're looking at this chart, and I did this once already, when you look at the bottom,
I'm sorry, Dennis, there actually is a question. I'm gonna
Okay.
stop sharing so I can see the
You
raised hand.
interrupt me anytime you need.
Mr. Ross has a question.
Okay.
Yeah, Dennis, I just want a clarification on the main motion. You said
Yes.
that it's not official until the chair restates it.
Yes, that's accurate.
Hi, Dr. Shannon. This is Eunice Glover. Did call you this?
Sorry about that.
Okay, that's whether the motion has been seconded or not. Is that correct?
The way it would play out is that someone would make a motion.
Yes.
We grant the liquor license to the store down the street or to the restaurant down the street, and give the address. Someone says, I second it.
Yes.
And then it would be the responsibility of the chair, okay, to say something to this effect. They would say, it has been moved and seconded that the restaurant down the street at such and such of address receive a liquor license. Is there any discussion? So until the chair does that, technically speaking, it's not before the body.
It is not before the body until the chair restates it.
And that's exactly right.
Thank you.
So absolutely. Having said that, so what we're talking about tonight, the perspective tonight is rights and responsibilities of the membership. So having said that, let's suppose that it was a legitimate motion and the second was legitimate. The chair can't say, well, it's not before the body until I state it. And I just decided not to state it. So it's not before the body. So next, that's not legal. The chair can't behave that way. The chair can't conduct himself or herself that way. The chair must not entertain, but the chair must state a properly moved and seconded motion. That's not illegal. That's not absurd. That's not out of order. So that is important. The position of the chair, let me just go down the line. The position of the chair, the position of the parliamentarian, the position of the secretary, the vice chair, if there's a second vice chair, those are all delegated responsibilities by the voting membership. The officers answer to the voting membership ultimately. So now the chairperson is responsible to be the referee and to decide on who's going to talk and what's in order and what's not. That's a lot of responsibility. Your organization, by electing them to be the chairperson, you've granted them a lot of responsibility and a lot of authority. But ultimately, the voting membership has the authority. So I see a couple other questions up. And Leah, should I just look and pick them? Or
I can tell you in order, Ms.
Walker.
Yeah.
Wait,
yes.
Are you ready for me, Leah?
Ms. Walker?
Yes. I would like to know, can the chair appoint someone else to restate the motion?
The chair can, if the chair wants to, and so I'm not sure I understand your question. I'll do it this way. The chair does have the authority to step out of the chair and bring somebody up with the permission of the voting body. Because if the chairperson wants to speak to a question, then the chairperson can't enter into debate or speak to a question while they're chairing the meeting. So sometimes the chairperson says, this is something I really care about. This is an issue that I just need to speak on. And so to do that, they must remove themselves from the chair and invite, and it's typically the vice president. If the vice president isn't involved in debate, the vice president would come up and finish that particular motion through. But the chairperson cannot just say, well, and so maybe it's not clear what you're providing. If I was a chairperson, if I was a chairperson and I didn't quite understand what this person was trying to say, and we're struggling, and maybe they've got a strong accent and my ears ain't getting it. Maybe somebody else that's nearby could pick up better what they're saying. And I, as the chair, would have no problem saying, Miss So-and-so, can you understand what Mr. So-and-so is saying? And then work that through. And then once I learned what it was, then I would state it. If that's what you're talking about. But you can't just, the chair just can't appoint somebody to do bits and pieces of their own work. That's their responsibility. And I don't know if I answered you or not, Ms. Walker.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, and Princess Wilson is up next.
Yes, my question is, once you make the main motion, the discussion precedes that or goes afterwards?
Afterwards, the motion is moved, then it's seconded, then the chair states the question. And if it's a debatable question, the chair should say, in the technical term, what Robert's rule says you're supposed to say. I don't use this term. The book says you're supposed to say, is there any debate? I like the word discussion better. So that's what I use. And so if I was doing it, I would say it has been properly moved and seconded that the restaurant receive a liquor license. Is there any discussion? So it's moved, it's seconded, the chair states it, and then the chair says, is there any discussion?
And this is after the presenter has made their case on what we're voting on, correct?
Oftentimes, yeah, oftentimes in a committee, that's what will take place. A committee will have their presentation ready, and then they'll provide that presentation. And then after the presentation is done, at the end of that presentation, the presenter for the committee, often the chairperson, will say, on behalf of the committee, I move the adoption of this recommendation. And coming from a committee, by the way, it doesn't need a second because you've already got more than one person interested in discussing it because they're on the committee. So, but in that case, that's accurate. And with a committee report, that's the way it should be. Now it's just the opposite. That's just the opposite with a person on the floor. And if I'm chairing a meeting, I'm a little patient with this, especially if an organization really doesn't understand procedure. I let it go a little bit. And then I might interrupt and say, is there a motion that you're getting ready to present? Sometimes people stand up and they'll start talking about what they want to, what they're getting ready to propose, and it could go on for a while. You're really not supposed to do that. There should be no discussion on a motion from the floor until there's a motion and a second and it's stated by the chair. Then you talk. It's really not proper to stand up and say, I've been going to that restaurant for a long time now. My family and I have been going to that restaurant. And I just think it's a great place. And I think, matter of fact, my grandpa used to go to that restaurant. And I remember back when, and they go into all this stuff. And so therefore I want to move that we grant a liquor license. They've given their debate, their argument before they ever made the motion. That's really not accurate. They're really not supposed to do that. Technically speaking, and it's important that this is played out this way. There shouldn't be any discussion about a matter unless the body agrees, then that's okay. But there shouldn't be any discussion about a matter without a motion and a second on the floor, because that keeps things expedited. That keeps things focused, and you know what you're talking about. Because if you just start talking about stuff, and you might want to make a motion, I don't know yet, let me talk for a little while longer. Well, you can get into fishing and basketball and who knows what else. So and that just takes up everybody's time. So there does need to be a motion and a second first. Did that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So Leah, I think you're muted. I see your lips moving, but
That explains. Yes, thank you. The next question is coming from Gay Lemmerhurt. And I just want to remind everyone, because I'm seeing hands raised from folks that just walked in the door. So you can't possibly have a question on the course content if you just walked in the door. I just want to remind everyone that questions have to be limited to the course content. So at this point, you should only be asking a question based on what Mr. Conway has already taught. That will allow him time to get through the rest of it. If we're just asking questions at random, we're never going to get to the part where you're empowered to make decisions in your NPU. So let's please keep that in mind. Gay, you can go ahead.
I just have a quick question. Is it proper, sometimes no one seconds a motion, so is it proper for the chairperson to ask for a second to the motion?
That's okay. It is okay. I won't, especially if I don't know the organization. If I know the organization, I know there are folks that are interested in talking about this. They just haven't spoken up. In other words, somebody moves a proposal and I know that they want to talk about it. I might say, is there a second? But if I don't know the organization, and I've done this before, and somebody moves a proposal, I just wait. And if there's no second, I'll just say the motion dies for lack of a second. Because what a second means is that there's more than one person that wants to talk about this. And if there's only one person that wants to talk about this, then chances are it's not going anywhere. And it could very well be a waste of precious time. So that's one of the that is the reason for a second. Having said that, if somehow it gets by the chair and somebody says, I move that we grant the liquor license to the restaurant down the street, and somebody says, I think that's a great idea. Well, you know, you're not supposed to speak yet, but looks like we got a second. So a second, all a second is doing is establishing the fact that more than one person wants to talk about it. And it dies if there is not a second.
There was also a question in the chat from Yvonne Tooks asking, what is the role of the parliamentary?
I was actually in the middle of sending a response to her, but go ahead. We can go ahead.
Okay. The parliamentarian is someone that's supposed to know procedure and advise the chair. The chairperson has a lot more to think about rather than just procedure. The chairperson is thinking of content. The chairperson is thinking of personalities. The chairperson is thinking of flow. They're watching and trying to read the room, not to make any final decisions, but to know how to best serve the room. And so the parliamentarian is there thinking about procedure, thinking about process. And while the chair is doing his or her job, the parliamentarian might whisper in their ear and say, that's debatable, or that's not debatable, or that requires a 2/3 vote, etc., because they've got so much to think about. Or the chairperson might turn to the parliamentarian and say, what's the rule on this? And then the parliamentarian should be ready with that advice. The parliamentarian doesn't have authority in the room. The parliamentarian doesn't run the meeting. The parliamentarian is an advisor, a consultant. And it's happened with me serving as a parliamentarian. I would speak to the chair and the chair said, I'm going to do it different this time. I just back up and say, it's your call. And if the body lets them do it, then they do it. So the parliamentarian is not an authority in the room. The parliamentarian can't say, excuse me, Madam Chair, you just did wrong and I'm not going to allow it. The parliamentarian does not have that authority.
All right, Dennis, we've got one more question and then we're going to move on. So Ms. Reynolds, you have the last question for now.
Thank you, Leah. Dennis, will you just repeat what you said if there is a motion or about a report or whatever it is coming out of committee? If a committee is in your NPU and they're making a report, does that have to be second motion or second on? That's what I just need clarity on that, please.
Sure. With a committee, there doesn't have to be a second because as we've pointed out, a second means that more than one person wants to talk about it. And if it's coming from a committee, if a proposal's coming from a committee, you already have more than one person.
Right, okay.
About it. So that's why you'll hear a chairperson often say, this is coming from a committee, so it doesn't need a second.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Very welcome.
All right, Dennis, we can move on. Thank you.
Okay. Very welcome. So you're looking at the chart. It starts with main motion, postpone indefinitely, amend, commit or refer, postpone. It goes all the way up, and the very top says fix the time to which to adjourn. You'll probably never use that one. A few of these you probably won't use. but that's okay. They do have an important role in many organizations. The reason the main motion is at the bottom is because it is the lowest ranking motion. It's probably the most important motion, but it's the lowest ranking motion for procedure. So I'll just read what's on the handout that I have. While debate is taking place on the main motion, a motion and a second to amend the main motion is in order. This would result in the motion to amend being the immediately pending motion. Now that's a mouthful, I know. What that means is the main motion being on the bottom is the lowest ranking motion. So when you're talking about the proposal that's been moved and seconded, now you're talking it over, it is proper to go ahead and make a motion to amend that, because the motion to amend ranks higher than the main motion. That's why you can do that, because it's a higher rank. So that's important to know, because if you are in an NPU meeting and you would like to make a motion to amend a particular proposal, unless the amendment is illegal or absurd or so on, you have that right. You have that right to make that motion, and it is in order because it's higher ranking than the main motion. So I'm on page 3 now, and I'm at the top of the page, and what I'm doing is I'm talking about the ranking of motions and why this is important. While debate is taking place on the motion to amend, a motion and a second to postpone the main motion until the next meeting is in order. So this is what this means. So you're talking about whether or not the restaurant's going to get a liquor license. Someone makes a motion to amend. It's seconded. Now what you're doing is you're talking about the amendment. And then as you're talking about the amendment, someone makes a motion to say, I move that we postpone this discussion until the next meeting. That is in order. And the reason we know that's in order is because it's higher up on the chart. And this chart is a picture, but because of procedural logic, if you will, that's why it is in order. When you're talking about a main motion, you're talking about an amendment that would pertain to that main motion. It is legitimate to say, with a motion in a second, it is legitimate to say, I think it's a good idea to bring this up again at the next meeting and finish our discussion then. So that is in order. So the next line on page 3. By comparison, one could not make the motion to amend a main motion while the motion to postpone definitely is pending. Again, I know this is a mouthful, but this is what this means. So let's say that we have a main motion that people are discussing. And then somebody says, I move that we postpone this to the next meeting. Okay, second. Now folks are talking about whether or not to postpone. And if you look at postpone definitely, you see that it is debatable, but you don't really talk about whether or not it's a good idea to postpone it. So you're talking about whether or not it's a good idea to postpone it. And then somebody makes a motion, I move that we amend the liquor license. Well, that's not in order. And the reason it's not in order is because postpone definitely is higher rank. You can't drop below the pending motion that's of higher rank than the one you want to move. And you couldn't, if there's a motion on the floor to postpone definitely, you couldn't move to send it to committee because that's of a lower rank. So that's important for you to know, because if the chairperson of the parliamentarian know that, and they should, by the way, it's a good idea for them to, then you try to make a motion to amend while a motion to postpone definitely is pending, and they say that the motion's out of order and you didn't know this, you might think that they're trying to take control, when actually what they're doing is they're just following the rules as laid out in procedure. So, but if there's a motion to amend that's pending and somebody makes a motion that says, I move that we postpone the main motion with the discussion on the amendment, I move that we send it to the next meeting, second, and then the chair says, you can't do that, that's out of order. Well, no, it's not. That is in order. As a matter of fact, I'll make this statement, and in live training sessions, I always see a lot of eyes get big whenever I say this. You can actually, there's 13 motions here. You can actually go 13 motions deep. But that'd just be crazy. Nobody would want to do that. But that's the reality of the ranking of the motions. As long as you are, if there's a motion pending, as long as you move the motion that's of higher rank, that is in order. All of the things being considered and equal, that is in order. Okay, so that's important to know. Now we'll walk through these motions a little bit, and let me check the time real quick. All right, we're doing okay. We're going to walk through these motions a little bit to help you as members know that you're not just stuck with somebody's proposal. And when somebody gives a proposal, they make a motion, and you know, a lot. I mean, and I'm not. Maybe I am trying to be a little bit funny, but I hear this all the time. You know, people roll their eyes and they say, you know, no matter how crazy the motion is, there's always going to be somebody that's going to second that motion. There's always somebody. And so, and that's just the case. That's just the way it is. And so you just put up with it. But so you've got a main motion on the floor. Somebody has seconded it. You don't really care for it. You're not stuck with it. It's not something that you have to live with. Because remember, always remember that when somebody makes a motion, just because it's a proposal that two people think it ought to be discussed, or two people think it ought to be discussed, that doesn't mean it's going to be voted in. And I try to make sure that everybody understands that. If you've got a room of 100 people, just because two people think it's a good idea to discuss it, it doesn't mean that it'll pass. And if it does pass, then it passes. I mean, that's remember what we're talking about? Excuse me, pardon me. We're talking about the majority of the voting membership having the authority and the right to make its own decisions on its own behalf. That means that if you don't like the decision, you know, you're better off just supporting it if you get outvoted. Because that's you know, let me back up and put it this way. I've worked with a lot of groups that struggle with a chairperson. I've seen it happen. I've had to help a number of organizations with a chairperson that's not doing what they ought to do. And so they struggle with a chairperson not doing what they ought to do. And so we help them with that. We help get things squared away. And then that same person is concerned about the chairperson not doing what they ought to do. When they get voted down, when their vote doesn't win the day, they feel like things were unfair and things were, but now wait a minute, the whole idea here to begin with was to make sure that the voting majority got their way. So if the voting majority gets their way over against the chair when the chair didn't like it, well, guess what? That applies to me too. If the voting majority got their way and I didn't like it, that applies to me. And so I have to be kind and respectful and suck it up and say the majority won the day. So, but what I can do is I can make a motion, and we won't talk about postpone indefinitely. That's just a motion to indirectly vote on something that you don't like. It's an embarrassment. You know, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, so we're just I move to postpone it indefinitely. Second, you know, we might talk about it a little bit and then vote. We're not voting directly on the motion. It's an indirect vote. It kills it. If that passes, it kills the main motion. So, but you heard the main motion and it's seconded, and you're thinking, you know, that ain't too bad, but man, I've got a lot of things that I think need to be different on that. You're a voting member of the organization. As a voting member of the organization, you have a right to make a motion to amend it. You have that right. And you might think, well, people might laugh. People might think it's a dumb amendment. Okay, maybe not. You don't know. And if it gets voted down, it gets voted down. But you have every right to hold your head up high and say, well, for example, let's say that there's a liquor license question pending, the restaurant down the street, and it's been moved and seconded to grant the liquor license. And you're thinking, well, boy, you know, that restaurant, I think it needs to be cleaned up a little bit before we start doing that. And I'd hate to see this get passed and have that not, you know, be cleaned up. So I would, if I was in the NPU and if this was an option, again, you know your content better than I. These are just examples. So I would raise my hand or stand up, whatever is required to get the chair's attention. They would call on me and I would say, you know, I would like to amend the motion by saying that they can have their liquor license once they get the restaurant cleaned up on the outside and some details on the inside. Second. And then you talk about that. Maybe it fails, maybe it doesn't, maybe it passes. But you have every right as a member to not just settle for the wording that you've heard in the main motion. You have every right to amend the main, or recommend to amend the main motion. If it's seconded, it'll be talked about and that amendment will be voted on. So that's your right. You have the authority to do that. And with that, you also have the authority to make a motion to send it to committee, maybe back to the same committee. That's a legitimate motion. Maybe this is coming out of committee. Committee's looked at it. We like it. We think we want to go ahead and recommend to the restaurant, recommend that the restaurant receive their liquor license. And you're thinking, boy, there's more research that needs to be done on this. This committee needs to look at this again. And so I make a motion that it goes back to committee. Second, well, if that passes, guess what? It goes back to committee. And the reason I'm bringing these things up is because we're talking about your rights and authority as members. And what these motions do is they represent those rights. You don't have to just settle for a proposal that you don't care for. And so I'll run through it. You can make a motion to change the wording. That would be to amend. You can make a motion to send it to committee for more research. You can make a motion to postpone it until you can postpone it until the end of the meeting, or you can postpone it, make a motion to postpone it until the next meeting. And again, it needs a second and so on. But you have this power, if you will, you have this authority to make these proposals about a motion that comes up that you're not real fond of. Maybe it's discussions, just people are talking about it way too long. By the way, now that we're here, let me point out that debate, according to Robert's Rules of Order, the amount of debate that is allowed for any debatable motion is 2 speeches, 10 minutes each. That's how much debate is allowed, unless that is changed. And that's why I'm bringing it up now, because that can be changed. But the way that works is if you're in an NPU meeting and you stand up and you comment about the liquor license, for example, and whether or not I think they should get it. I think it's a great place, and I my family goes there, and I like to have a beer with my pizza, and so I think it's great that they get a liquor license, and then and then you want to say more. You sit down, and I lost my train of thought there for a second. Sorry about that. Then you sit down and somebody else says something, and then you think, oh, wait, I thought of something else. And you want to stand up. After you spoke the first time, everybody else gets a chance to speak if they want to before you speak again. So that's important. And if the chairperson knows that and they're guiding the discussion accordingly, then don't feel slighted, don't feel left out. That's the rules. The rules are that once you speak, then you have to give everybody else a chance. The chair is supposed to give everybody else a chance to speak. And then once that's done, and everybody in the room, chances are everybody in the room isn't going to speak. But once there's a strong enough pause, a long enough pause after folks have said their piece, then raise your hand and the chair say, okay, go ahead. You've got your second turn. So that's important to know. If you think it's going on way too long, even though it's well within the rules, 2 speeches each, 10 minutes each, then you can make a motion to limit that debate. Maybe you would say, I make a motion that we limit debate on this motion, on this discussion, to 1 minute each, 1 speech per person. And from, until we're done with this, I second it. That requires a 2/3 vote, and it is amendable. But the reason I'm bringing this up, again, we're doing basics here, and you can study more about this stuff yourself, and I'll give you the title of the book in just a moment. But the limit or extend limits of debate will change that if it passes. If it passes. So one more. Let me do one more, and then I'll take questions if there's questions. There's a motion that it's called I move the previous question. That's the technical phrasing. What you'll often hear is somebody sitting out in the assembly, in the membership room, and they'll call a question. And oftentimes it's interpreted as, okay, we got to vote now. That's not how that works. And if you've been in any of my classes, you've learned this already. Maybe this is a good refresher for you. This motion, you can't just call the question. The motion to call the question or to move the previous question, what that means is if it passes, all discussion is over. If the chance for an amendment is over, it's time to vote where we are. If that passes, that's what that means. So what's required is, let's say folks are talking about it. Mr. Smith talked, Ms. Jones talked, Mr. Andrews talked, and so on. And then you raise your hand and you want to turn, you're recognized by the chair, you stand up and you say, hey, I call the question. And everybody understands that. If you want to move the previous question, it's the same phrasing, this part needs the same motion, different phrasing, but I call the question. That has to be seconded. So you can't just holler it out. You have to move it just like any other motion. It has to be seconded. It's not amendable, it's not debatable, and it requires a 2/3 vote. And if that passes, whatever it is you've been discussing, whatever the immediately pending motion is, now it's time to vote. So that's an important distinction, because I can't count the number of meetings that I've been in where somebody will just holler, call the question. And it's not even, they weren't even recognized by the chair. Matter of fact, I saw a city council, a major city, it's a large city in the country. I watched a video where one of the council members said, I call the question. And then this council member looked out to the audience and said, that means that we have to vote now. Well, no, it didn't. She just didn't understand, and nobody else understood. And they voted because she said, call the question. It's not how that works. So we've worked through some motions, some of the subsidiary motions. Does anybody have any questions?
I do not see any hands raised. Samantha, do you have the thing pulled up so you can share your screen? Okay, Mr. Ross has a question. Go ahead, Mr. Ross.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Ross. I muted you by mistake. Please.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Conway,
Yes.
only on the main motion is it official after the chair restates it. Is that correct?
Actually, for every motion, let's suppose that the main motion has been moved and seconded, the chair has stated it, and you're talking about the merits of the liquor license.
Yes.
It says, if someone says, I move to amend
Yes.
motion by saying that it needs to be cleaned up first, second, the chair does have to state that as well. So that applies to every motion.
That does apply to every motion. Second
It does apply to every motion. That way the chair has the control, because the chair may have to call it out of order. And if folks just start talking about it, and the chairs having to catch up. Wait. No, you can't talk about that.
Sure.
So, yeah.
And just for clarity, when the question is called, that's calling for the chair to restate the motion. Is that correct?
No, that's something different. When the question is called, that's a colloquial expression. The proper expression is, I move the previous question, and it's lost its meaning. They should really change that. That version. But when somebody says, I call the question, what they're saying is I want to vote on this thing now. And so somebody will say, I call the question, I second it. It's not debatable, it's not amendable. It takes 2/3 vote. And if that motion passes, the motion to call the question. If that motion passes, now if you were talking about the liquor license, now you vote on that liquor license right there. There's no more debate.
So that's the end of the discussion then?
That's the end of the discussion.
Okay.
If the motion to call the question passes by 2/3.
Sure, which was one of the definitions I got for calling the question. So thank you for that.
Very welcome.
One more question.
Sure.
I've read somewhere, and I've used it before, that the chair has the privilege to reject any motion from the floor. with or without cause.
That's
And
inaccurate.
okay,
That's inaccurate.
okay.
Yeah.
You know, Dennis, if you will, thank you, Mr. Ross, for bringing that up. We have a couple of more I'm going to mute you, Mr. Ross, because there's some feedback. We have a couple of questions in the chat, but I would actually like for you to spend a little bit of time on that question because I see that all over the city.
Okay.
I see people making motions and the chair rejecting the motion, and then the meeting just moves on because the chair rejected the motion. So would you please explain to the class why that is inaccurate and what should be done instead?
Okay.
Thank you.
The chairperson has authority to enforce the rules. The chairperson does not have the authority to decide that a motion isn't a good motion for the organization. For example, if the chair thinks that it's not a good idea for the restaurant to have, and I keep going back to that because that just keeps us in the same place. If the chair doesn't think it's a good idea for that liquor license to be given to that restaurant because he's had a bad experience there, family members have, he knows some people in the room that have had bad experience in that restaurant, and so he doesn't think that that's a good idea. The chair cannot therefore say, I reject that motion, we're not going to go forward, and then we'll just move on from here and go on to the next one. The chair does not have that authority. Now, having said that, there is, and I'm afraid I'm going to confuse things if I do this, but we'll just do it. Okay. There is a motion that is available for a member of the body or for the chair to say, I object to the consideration of that motion, but it still makes the point that we're trying to stress here. The chair actually does have the authority. It's an incidental motion. The chair has the authority. Let's say somebody stands up and says, again, the liquor license. I think we need I move that we grant a liquor license to the restaurant down the street. The chair does have the authority to say, I object to the consideration of that question. So if he does that or she does that, that requires a 2/3 vote on his or her own authority. And actually this helps the point. So here's the chair saying, I object to the consideration of that question. That's legitimate. But he or she doesn't all by him or herself get to maintain that. The only way the chairperson can maintain that is with a 2/3 vote. And if you don't get that 2/3 vote, then guess what? That motion is in order. And the chair is responsible and obligated to process that motion. If it's moved and seconded, even if the chair doesn't like it or he thinks it's a terrible idea, if it's not illegal or absurd on its face, then that chairperson has to process that motion. He or she is insubordinate or negligent in their responsibilities if they do not. And when we get toward the end of this, we'll talk about practical, technical solutions for that. But remember, the chairperson is a type of referee, a moderator. The chairperson is enforcing the rules. The chairperson isn't enforcing their opinions. There's a big difference. So I don't know if I answered the question. Did I answer the question?
You did. I want to ask one other kind of tag along question to that for the benefit of the class.
Yeah,
Under what circumstances can a chairperson reject a motion on his or her own authority and say, we're not dealing with that motion, I reject that motion, we're moving on?
Okay. Remember, a motion can't be illegal, a motion can't be absurd, an NPU can't vote out the mayor. I'm being crazy, but an NPU can't do that. So I move that we vote out the mayor. Well, that motion's not in order. You can't, I'm not gonna allow that. So having said that, and as crazy as this sounds, and this is where this is important for us tonight and for the NPUs tonight, as crazy as that sounds, that decision by the chair can be overridden.
Mm-hmm.
You hear what I just said? Somebody makes a motion, I move that we vote out the mayor. Second, somebody's always going to second. I move that we vote out the mayor. Second, and the chair says, that motion is not in order. We don't have the authority to vote out the mayor. Believe it or not, the voting membership can overrule the chair, even on that question. Even on that, Chris.
With a two-thirds majority, correct?
Actually, no.
So with a 50% plus
majority
one
vote.
majority,
With-
okay, simple
With a
majority.
majority vote, the body can overrule the chair.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I'm going to take a couple of the questions from the chat, and then I see Mr. Ross has his hand up again, so we'll get to that as well. If the sorry, I skipped one. Can a presenter put a motion on the floor to support their own project? I'm going to remind everybody to please keep your questions relevant to our course content, because we're talking about empowering members to participate in their meetings, but that's a good question. Can a presenter put a motion on the floor to support their own project?
On just as you worded that, absolutely. I don't know how to answer that any other way. In other words, I make a motion. I own the restaurant down the street. I make a motion that we grant me a liquor license. It's my project. It's my thing. It's my restaurant. And my wife is sitting here with me, and she's a member of the NPU. Maybe my neighbor. Let me say my neighbor, because maybe family members are different in different NPUs. But let's say my neighbor. You know, we're good buddies, and he's going to second it for me. There's nothing wrong with that. Remember, it has to be voted on. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but yeah, if it's my project, there's no reason why I can't make a motion to have my project go my way.
So the only thing I want to add to that, because every once in a while, parliamentary procedure needs a kind of addendum to the procedure as it relates to city code and city,
Yes.
the ethical guidelines. So I'm going to drop in the chat the ethical guidelines for NPU officers. And it is really a good guide for all NPU participants, not just the officers. The officers are bound to that code, but it's a good guideline for anyone. What I would recommend is that if the presenter is, first of all, the presenter would have to be a member of that organization to make the motion.
Yes.
That's first and foremost. But if there is any sort of, if there could even be the appearance of impropriety, especially as it relates to a financial interest, the very best thing to do is to allow someone else to make that motion. It isn't a good idea for the applicant / presenter to make a motion if there is any sort of financial interest, or if there could be the appearance of a financial interest. Ethics has weighed in on that multiple times, and it's just always, it saves me so much work. It saves our team so much work, and it just keeps everybody out of trouble if you just let someone else make that motion. So I'm going to move on to the next question, unless Dennis.
Let me speak to it quickly as you've done that, as you provided that. From a procedural standpoint, it is okay. From an ethics standpoint, with the rules that you're operating under with an NPU, those are modified. And state law even modifies parliamentary procedure for nonprofits. And so what Leah just shared is very, very important. And thank you, Leah, for doing that.
Absolutely. I try to keep the people out of trouble, Dennis. I try. Cut down on my workload as well. All right. The next question is, if the presenter is a member of the body and has no conflicting interest and has the floor, then why not? And I think that was that was about the calling the question, Mr. Martin. You'll have to.
That was an answer to the previous question.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So I'm gonna skip right by that then. Thank you. All right. Oh, that's another one on that same thing. All right. Maybe that's the only question. Hold on. Yeah, all right, as an MP, nope, I'm gonna remind the folks that came in late. Your questions have to be relevant to course content. So please ask questions based on what Mr. Conway has taught. And then at the end, if there is time for additional kind of random questions, then we can absolutely utilize his expertise to get those random questions answered. But for now, let's stick to the course content. And I think we're good, Mr. Conway. You want to?
Okay.
Wait, I'm sorry. Here is one that was on topic. Who calls for the, whoa. Sorry, my cat disappeared. Who,
I'm getting dizzy.
me too. Who calls for the vote to overrule the chairperson? So you talked about overriding the chairperson's authority. Who calls for that vote?
Sure. We'll get to that.
Okay, great.
We'll work our way to that. And that was the content that I had in mind. If it gets to be, if we're getting late in the evening and it looks like we're behind, I'll jump right ahead to those things. And but good question, very good question. If you'll look at your chart, you'll notice that as we move our way up, you see the motion to recess, the motion to adjourn. Oftentimes what will happen in an organization, I'm bringing this up just to stress the authority that the membership has, because the membership may not want to do this. The chairperson may say, well, let's take a 10-minute recess and then hit the gavel. Well, actually, believe it or not, unless the governing documents give the chair that authority, the chair doesn't have the authority to do that. And this is just, I'm bringing this up just to keep before you the authority that the voting membership has. A recess can't take place unless, technically speaking, unless there's a move, a second, and a vote. It's not debatable, but it is amendable if there's a motion pending already. That's why it's way up here like this, high ranking, because you might be talking about an amendment to a motion and somebody says, I move that we take a recess. Well, that's in order. And then it's seconded, and then maybe it passes. It's a majority vote. But just to stress, you may be sitting there and goodness gracious, I need a break. We've been doing this for a little while now, and I think everybody could just stretch a little bit and be helpful. You have the authority as a member. Once it's your turn to speak, get recognized by the chair, you have the authority to say, I move that we take a recess, and give a time that you're thinking, and it's seconded and it's voted on. If the chair says, if I'm chairing the meeting, what I'll do sometimes is I'll say, if there are no objections, why don't we take a 10-minute recess? That's called unanimous consent. And I'll use unanimous consent, and Robert talks about using a mechanism of unanimous consent if it's a slam dunk.
Dennis.
That this is,
Dennis, I don't know if you can hear me, but your connection is a little spotty.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
I think he's frozen.
Yeah, so for most of our classes, we have somebody that can pick up and run with it, but this isn't that class, Dennis. So you're gonna have to fix your connection. There's nobody else that can teach this. Fingers crossed. Come on, y'all, send up the good mojo or whatever. I see the yellow bar.
what should I do?
Well, Leah, while we're waiting, I have a question.
Well, there's nobody to answer your question unless it's related, unless it's not related to parliamentary procedure.
Well, no, this is probably more related to the course outline for this evening. So do you know if we're going to run through any examples? I know that Dennis kind of touched on a few examples, but any formal examples? So maybe like playing out a scenario.
Examples of what specifically? You mean examples of what he's teaching?
Yeah, like a scenario, playing it out, just so that we can kind of see it, as it would happen, in a real setting as close as possible.
So the intention was that at the end, somewhere around 8 o'clock or so, it provided that we're able to stay on the timeline, on his timeline, or somewhere around 8 o'clock or so, hopefully he would have time to answer questions, more specific questions. And I know who's in the room, and I know why you're here, all of you. So I know that there are specific questions that you all are here to have answered, and there's a reason that we asked you to be here. So hopefully if we can get through the material, we'll have some time at the end to take some of those more specific questions. And it looks like Dennis is back.
Okay.
I am,
Good, awesome.
I am, and I can hear everybody now. So, yeah, I don't have any, there's no mock process that I have laid out. And I would hesitate to use an actual recommendation brought up in an actual NPU because that would be awkward and wouldn't be helpful for that issue. So I don't know. I don't know if that helps. I don't know if that answers the question. Maybe there's a time and a way when we get back live again, if that's the plan, to do some mock meetings and procedure. Maybe that's an option, but I don't have anything set up tonight.
Okay, thank you. That's cool.
And also add that typically what we do before, is that bylaws class, y'all? I think it's our bylaws class and our chairs training, perhaps. We usually draw on real life scenarios, on things that have happened through the year, and we call it lessons that we've learned. And we get actual answers to those questions from Dennis, and we cover that in that material. So there are other places throughout the NPU University curriculum where we take real life scenarios that have happened in real NPUs in the previous year and address those and try to help other NPUs avoid falling into those same situations. But yeah, I know we've got at least two really major issues that are taking place in NPUs. And I know that people from those NPUs are present in the room and wanting some answers. So we'll try to get to that towards the end if we can.
Okay. So what I was describing was something called a unanimous consent. And if a chairperson uses this, it's legitimate. The chairperson's looking out and seeing everybody's just kind of squirming, and then looking at their watch and rolling their eyes, and you still got a long way to go in your agenda. I might do something like this. I might say, well, if there are no objections, why don't we take a 10-minute recess? And hearing none, we're recessed for 10 minutes. That's called unanimous consent. It's a procedure where it's a slam dunk. There's not going to be any discussion or vote. Everybody wants to do it, so you use unanimous consent. If I say if there are no objections, why don't we just go ahead and take a 10-minute recess? And somebody says, actually, I do object. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. What I would do in that case is I would take the vote. All in favor of taking a recess, say aye. Those opposed, say no. And if the ayes have it, you go into a 10-minute recess. So if that's the time that's proposed. And the reason I'm bringing all that up is just to help you see the authority that the voting body has. Again, just by way of example. So the next chart is incidental motions. Incidental motions. Now you'll notice the chart is set up similar to the other one, where we started with the main motion at the bottom and worked our way up. This chart, when you see incidental motions, when you're talking about incidental motions, these do not relate in a relationship of ranking. They don't. Just because division of the assembly is above inquiry, it doesn't mean that it's higher in rank and that it doesn't operate the same way. That first chart is the only chart that has a ranking of motions where it functions that way. So let's refer to the first chart just for a second. There's a main motion about a main motion in a second about a liquor license. Somebody wants to make the amendment, and so then the chair says, okay, you made amendment, go ahead and start talking. And nobody seconded it. And I mean, he's the only one. Nobody joined in, nobody said anything. That one person said, I make an amendment. I want to make an amendment that he cleans the place up first. And the chair says, okay, do you have anything you want to speak on that? I would, if I was in the room, especially if I didn't want the liquor license or if I had a particular opinion, I'd stand up and I'd say, point of order. There was no second. That's legitimate. And you can interrupt to do that. You can interrupt to do it, to make a point of order. So remember in the first chart, we said that you can't interrupt somebody. There were two motions on the chart that where you could. On this chart, you can interrupt for a point of order. You can interrupt for an appeal. You can interrupt for objective consideration of the question. That's the motion that I described to you earlier, and then others that are on this list. So it's important, just let me continue with that train of thought. It's important to keep in mind, can you interrupt, second, debate, amend, etc. So, but even though a point of order doesn't come in a ranking as such, it applies when it applies. That's the whole idea behind an incidental motion. It applies when it applies. So we're at the place now where I'm going to talk a little bit about it. Let me make sure. Yeah, okay. So I'm at the place now where I'm going to talk a little bit about the responsibility of the body or the authority of the body when a chair isn't doing what a chair should be doing. In discussions that I've had with some organizations, one of the things that's taking place is that in our virtual environment, a chairperson is locking people out, or a chairperson is muting people when they're talking, and the chairperson says, well, I don't want to hear what you have to say, we're not going to do that tonight, and click, and they mute them, or they just electronically. And I'll be real quick to admit to you, I'm not a tech person. I don't know how this works, but I do know that it does. I know that there are chair people who are locking people out of meetings with various organizations that I've worked with. And one thing that I think is good for an organization to do is to, and I spoke to somebody tonight or this afternoon, and this is going to be the process, a separate, independent, nonpartisan, and it could be a member, somebody needs to be running the electronics that doesn't have that kind of motivation. In other words, what is happening in our virtual environment is that because the chairperson has the electronics at their control, the organization has essentially given them the keys to the door of the room with the authority to stand somebody up, march them out the room, lock the door, and go back to his chair. They're doing it electronically. And that is never legitimate. No chairperson has that kind of authority. So in our virtual environment, it's a new experience. There's new challenges. It's a different way of having to learn how to do things. And I'm hoping that we all get to go back in person. I mean, it's convenient doing this class. I'm in my study tonight. When I get done here, I'm gonna go back downstairs in the living room and I'm gonna have a snack and watch TV with my wife. So this is really convenient. This is nice. But the downside is what I'm talking about. They're the challenges that come with it. So again, let me repeat. I think it's a very good idea and a highly effective approach if an organization that's going to do a virtual meeting will not put the hands of the electronics, will not put the electronics in the hands of the chairperson. That way they just, it's a real temptation. It's a real temptation. And to be fair, because what we're doing is we're talking about we're talking about membership authority and membership responsibility tonight and the rights that you have. It is a real temptation when somebody is voted in as president of an organization or chairperson of an organization to take control because they don't understand, and to give folks the benefit of the doubt, they don't understand in most cases. And if they do understand, do it anyway, then that's a problem. We'll address that. But they don't understand that theirs isn't to take control. Theirs is to moderate. There's a difference. And with that mistaken idea of it's my job to take control for the good of the organization, well, all I have to do is click this button and I'm doing my job. That's a mistake. So that's my first tip in virtual meetings. Let the electronics be handled by someone other than leadership, someone not in the seat of the chair. All right, so I've never done what I'm getting ready to do. I've never done this before. I don't know how effective it's going to be, but one of the reasons I want to do this is because, well, for a couple of reasons. I don't want to say it wrong, and it's easy enough. I'm going to read to you tonight. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read out of Robert's Rules of Order about the question of a point of order and an appeal when someone wants to appeal the decision of the chair. So I hope you don't mind. I have to read. I have to look at the page when I'm reading. I'm not very good at looking up when I read. So I hope it's not distracting. But I want you to hear this for yourself. This is Robert's Rules of Order, the full edition, and it's section 62. Section 62. And I'll begin to read. This is talking about remedies for abuse of authority by the chair in a meeting. That's what this is talking about. Now, again, before I continue, I want to stress, I've watched good people make the mistake of supposing that they're supposed to control the meeting and over the voting body. And it was a mistake. It's been an honest mistake oftentimes. And so I try to gently help them with that, with respect and kindness, and help them to understand they're mistaken. That's not their place. And so that's how I start. And then if they insist, I don't care what you say, I'm running this thing, I'm the boss, well, then we get a little more firm. Making and enforcing points of order and appeals. In attempting to remedy any incorrect or abusive act by the chair at a meeting, the first step is for a member to raise a point of order as soon as the breach of the rules occurs. So that's your responsibility as a member of the body. You believe the chair has made the wrong call. You don't have to wait to be recognized. Your chart says you get to interrupt. So as soon as the chair makes a mistake in your view, then you would call a point of order. Just stand up and or raise your hand and just speak it out, whatever the protocol is for your meetings. For example, and I'm reading out of Robert's Rules of Order. For example, some important rules of parliamentary procedure are that the chair must recognize any member who seeks the floor while entitled to it. In other words, a chairperson, and let's suppose we're meeting in person, a chairperson can't just ignore somebody who's raising their hand, and maybe he's calling out, maybe everybody else has had, is getting their first turn and the chair just hasn't got to them yet. But if he starts going around the room a second time and that person's first time hasn't even got to be recognized yet, that's a mistake, that's a problem. And so the chair must recognize everybody who has a right to the floor. So in our virtual environment, the chair cannot just say, I'm trying to listen to you, click. The chair cannot just say, I don't like what we're not going to talk about that tonight, click, and mute you. Now, if you're speaking out of order, then that's one thing. But when we're talking about a point of order, and again, I'm not a tech guy, but when we're talking about a point of order, there should be a mechanism in place where if you want to call a point of order, you can raise that hand or whatever Zoom or Microsoft Teams can allow you to do to get the chair's attention right now. I'm interrupting. I want to call a point of order. That's legitimate. It should be recognized. So they should recognize any person who's entitled to the floor. B, that after a member has properly made a motion that is not dilatory, the chair must either state that question on it or else rule it out of order for a specific valid reason. So the chair has the authority, and we've talked about this some tonight already. The chair has the authority to rule a motion out of order. The chair either has to recognize the motion, say, okay, is there a second, or however, wait for a second, and then proceed. Or else if the chair thinks the motion is not properly, it's not a proper motion, the chair must rule the motion out of order. The chair can't say, we ain't gonna do that tonight. The chair can't do that. The chair can say that motion is out of order. Now it may be a legitimate motion and it's not out of order, but the chair has to make that judgment. And we'll talk about the remedy as we move on. Okay, but the chair has to do one or the other. The chair either has to recognize it or call it out of order. The chair cannot hurry through the proceedings so quickly as to deprive the members of their rights to debate and to introduce secondary motions. A chair can't just gavel through and race through a meeting. And okay, there's a motion and a second on the floor for the restaurant to receive a liquor license. Any debate? I didn't think so. Click. Okay, next. Chair can't do that. Let's vote. Let's vote now. All in favor? Aye. Okay, good. We're done. Next. The chair can't do that. The chair has to give ample time for the process to take place. And these are things that are required by the chair. We're talking about someone who's mistakenly operating. They're operating in a mistaken way as a chair. So if the chair ignores a member seeking the floor while entitled to it, ignores a properly made non-dilatory motion, and dilatory means it's just a distraction. I've been in meetings where people they say things. I was in one meeting. As a matter of fact, I was in one meeting, and I'll just tell you this real quickly. It was a convention. It wasn't a big convention, but it was a convention, and they were having to vote in the constituents, and I was standing next to the chairperson. It was a woman, and every time the chairperson started to say something, and it was a coup attempt, is what it was. Every time the chairperson started to say something, somebody hollered out, point of order. And so I instructed the chairperson as an advisor to process that a couple, 3 times. And then it was just a way to stall the meeting, is what it turned out to be. And so I advised the chairperson to ignore it and to go ahead and process the vote, because they were dilatory. They were just stalling. They were just trying to distract. They were trying to do things to throw a wrench into the process. And that's a legitimate concern by a chair. So again, the chair does have that authority to make that judgment. Look, this is just dilatory. This isn't proper. You're just trying to mess up the process. And so I'm going to call that out of order, or I'm going to ignore it. The chair does have that authority, but hold on, the chair doesn't have final authority, and we'll get there. We will get there. So if you think the chair is making a mistake, raise a point of order. The chair may say, well taken. Thank you. You caught me. I goofed up on that one. I'll adjust. Or the chair may say, your point is not well taken. Please be seated. I'm going to proceed the way I planned, the way I ruled already, the way I decided I'm going to proceed that way. That the chair has that right. The chair has to make a judgment call. You've called a point of order. Again, I'll repeat it. The chair might say, your point is well taken. I'm going to adjust, or let's adjust. Or the chair may say, I've heard you. I disagree. We're going to continue on. They have that authority. Immediately, and this is where you come in an expanded sense. Immediately after the chair makes a ruling, any member who disagrees with it may then move to appeal. So the question was raised earlier. Who appeals the decision of the chair? Who does that? Any voting member has that right and has that authority to make that motion. So let me back up. So somebody goes to make a motion and the chair says, we're not doing that tonight. And I'm just using that because I've heard that before. So somebody makes a motion, the chair says, we're not doing that tonight. Excuse me, that's legitimate. Point of order. That's a legitimate motion. Okay, I've heard you. I disagree. That is not a legitimate motion. If you're convinced that it is, or anybody in the room is convinced that it is, the proper motion is, I appeal the decision of the chair. I appeal from the decision of the chair. That does have to be seconded. That does have to be seconded. What happens then? If the motion is debatable, the chair gets to speak. This is why I ruled the way I did. Then other members get to speak one time. Then the chair gets the last word. This is just how the rules are for the motion to appeal from the decision of the chair. Then the chair gets the last word. Then the vote takes place. And this is the vote. Shall the decision of the chair stand? That's the vote. So somebody makes a motion to and pardon me for staying here, but it just keeps things simple in my little brain. Somebody makes the motion to grant a liquor license to the restaurant. It's seconded. And the chairperson says, excuse me, we're not doing that tonight. And you know it's a legitimate motion, and you say point of order, there's nothing wrong with that motion. That's a legitimate motion. Okay, I've heard you. Your point is not well taken. I'm going to call that motion out of order tonight. And then somebody says, I appeal the decision of the chair. Somebody seconds it. Then what happens is the chair says, well, this is why I ruled that out of order. Because, and then he gives his reasons, or she gives her reasons. Then each person in the room who's a voting member gets a chance to weigh in. No, that was a legitimate motion. In other words, just like debating a regular motion, the chair would call on people. Okay, yes, Mr. Smith, you have the floor. Well, I think it was a legitimate motion because, and then Ms. Jones, you have the floor. Well, I don't think it was a legitimate motion because, and then the after all debate is done on the floor, the chair has the authority to have the last word. And then the vote is taken. Shall the decision of the chair stand? And if it's a majority vote, then the decision of the chair stands. If it's less than a majority vote, then he is overruled, or she. The vote didn't uphold the decision of the chair. So I'll repeat that again. Shall the decision of the chair stand? This is appeal from the decision of the chair. Takes a motion, takes a second, and if it's in the middle of a debatable motion, it is debatable in the way that I've described. So debate takes place. The chairperson has the final say and says, this is why I decided that's not a legitimate motion and it's out of order. And then he puts the motion. Shall the decision of the chair stand? Vote takes place. Majority vote. The chair's decision stands. That motion is not in order. The motion to grant a liquor license to the restaurant down the street is not in order. The body just decided that it's not in order. If it's the other way, if the chair says, shall the decision of the chair stand, and he doesn't get a majority, that means that motion for the liquor license for the restaurant is in order. And it should be processed accordingly. That's what that means. Now, one caveat, and it's important to recognize this, tie goes to the chair. The tie goes to the chair. If it's a tie vote, the chair gets it. Okay. So that's That's how that works. Now, you may end up in a situation where the chair says, I don't care what you say, I'm not gonna process that. Or the chairperson is going to ignore it. I'll read this paragraph. I think this is the right paragraph. I'm pretty sure it is. If the chair ignores an appeal appropriately made and seconded, a member can repeat the appeal, and if despite its being seconded, the chair ignores it again, the member can repeat it a third time. And if it is again seconded but still ignored by the chair, the member can immediately, standing in his place or her place, put the appeal to a vote without debate. The question may be put as, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? So here's the scenario. And we're treating this, electronics aside, because electronics puts a different mix in the question. We're treating this as if we're in a room, and because it's just easier to picture, it's easier to walk through the process without having to worry about electronics. So the point of order is made. Excuse me, I think that's a legitimate motion. Well, I've heard you and I disagree. We're going to proceed as I've ruled. I appeal this from the decision of the chair, and the chair just keeps on going. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I appeal the decision of the chair, and the chair ignores and just keeps going. A third time, Mr. Chairman, I appeal the decision of the chair. Remember, you have the authority to interrupt with that motion, because there's a little I right there under interrupt with the appeal, with the motion to appeal. What Robert's Rules is saying, or what Robert's Rules of Order is saying, and if your NPU has installed Robert's Rules of Order as its parliamentary rule book, then this applies to your NPU. If after the third motion, and second, by the way, it has to be seconded 3 times. It has to be moved and seconded 3 times. If the chair fails to recognize that, then that person who made the motion and it was seconded the 3rd time can turn to the body and say, shall the decision of the chair stand? The wording actually was, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? And then a vote takes place. That's the rules. That's legitimate. That's Robert's Rules of Order in such a case. Those are extreme circumstances. I've never seen any situation where that had to happen. The situation I described where those people were trying to conduct a coup, that was pretty extreme, and I didn't think I'd ever see anything like that. So I'm not saying it won't happen and can't happen. Matter of fact, that was a crazy day. The story I told you. But I mean, these rules are in here for a reason. There's potential for that to take place, and what this stresses is that the NPU belongs to the voting membership in most every case, unless the NPU has voted and decided in its bylaws that the board runs everything. And if that's the case, now we're talking about a different story. But in an NPU where the membership is voting in its leaders and the membership is making the final decisions, this applies to you. And this is the process. So what I'll do, and there's still a little bit more to talk about, that might be helpful, and Leah, we may be done before I thought tonight, and that's okay. Are there any questions at this point?
So when you say we might be done before you thought, does that mean you're done now and ready to take all the questions, or are you looking for questions related to?
No. I'm just looking at the clock and looking at my notes, and I'm getting, I shouldn't have said that.
Okay, so we'll take questions related to what you just taught.
Yes.
Okay, so this isn't the open forum for questions, guys, not yet. Let's take questions based on, no, that's okay, we're clear. I just wanted to make sure. So let's take questions based on that 3rd segment from Dennis's lesson here. Miss Adams, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, good afternoon. Yes,
Good
I think my
evening.
question is pertaining to the last portion, when he talked about how the chairperson can't not acknowledge a member.
Yes.
If the planner assigned to the NPU and the planner assistant person from the city is on that call, is it out of order for them to say to the chair that they're out of order, that someone has the hand up, you didn't acknowledge that person? Is it proper for them to say something to that chairperson or no?
Leah, maybe you can help me with that. I think she's describing a situation where a city planner is involved in the discussion. Is that?
No, not the discussion. I think you said something at the end where if a member raises the hand and the chairperson cannot acknowledge that person.
Okay.
Repeat it, say they disagree with the motion, the last part you just said. And you said the chairperson can't do that. Is it out of order for the planner who assigned or the city representative to say to the chair that you can't do that, you have to acknowledge the person?
Oh, I see what you're saying. A city.
So Dennis, let me give you context, Dennis.
Okay.
I don't know how to silence my phone. So the members often ask that question, and I give the answer from representing the Department of City Planning on behalf of the city. But it would be great if you would give that your answer as a parliamentarian as it relates to proper parliamentary procedure. And I think that will give a little bit of peace to the public.
Okay. So I'll just use Leah since Leah threw this back to me. If Leah is at an NPU meeting, she cannot look at the chair and say, you can't do that. She doesn't have that authority. If she's not a member of that NPU, she can't call a point of order, because that's what we're talking about. If the chairperson ignores somebody that's trying to get their hand raised and then just moves and they never get called on, and the chairperson moves on to the next segment in the agenda without recognizing that person, Leah or Samantha or Tony or anybody else can't being there, they can't point to the chair and say, no, you can't do that. You got to call on this person. So that's not their place. Now, except that if they live in the city and they are at a meeting of their own NPU and they are part of that meeting, then yes, they actually absolutely have the authority to raise their hand and say, I call a point of order, whether they're a city planner or not, unless there's a city code or a statement in the bylaws that restricts that. So from a procedural standpoint, they can. If there are code regulations that would state otherwise, then that would just come into play.
But that happened at our NPU in the last 3 years, where the chairperson was trying to facilitate the election. The city representative called that person's attention, who was in the chair seat, and told them they couldn't do that. They could not facilitate the election. That happened in the last 3 years. So you're giving very good information, still confusing to me, probably to some others, as to what are the rules of parliamentarian, other than what does your bylaw say. Then you say that the member had the last word most of the time. So it's just confusing for us to be part of a NPU meeting and being so disrespected by the chairperson and not allowing members to speak, mute them, and the city just sits there and does nothing or say nothing. And I know they told us over and over again, city has nothing to do with it, it's the bylaws, but you say the members has the right. So it's just hard to understand why the city sits there and not help the members to know what their rights are.
So that's what this
is. That's a good place for me to jump in, if you don't mind, Dennis.
No, please do, Leah, that's fine.
The city is actually helping the members by hosting this class. That's how we help the members, literally. I mean, you've got 5 or 6 current or former chairs in this room who would light the city on fire if we tried to take over the NPU in the way that some of you are asking us to do. It is truly a double-edged sword. We see the problems. The reason that we created NPU University is that we see the problems, but we're not authorized in any way. The code doesn't give us any authority. The NPUs don't give us any authority. Our department, we don't have the power to do what many of you want us to do, which is why we are having this class, which is why this is the 4th class that we've had on parliamentary procedure. It's the only topic that we cover 4 times in 1 year. This is also why that we sent out special invitations for this class. It's not something that we ordinarily do. We sent out a citywide alert as far as we possibly could for this particular class because we do want to help you. We are the city trying to help you. That's the only way we can help. We don't have any authority to call a point of order in the middle of a meeting. Mr. Ross is clapping. Thank you, Mr. Ross. Thank you. As a former chairperson, I appreciate that. And I saw your thumbs up, Mr. Martin. I appreciate that too, because they get it. They don't want us taking over their NPUs saying you can't do that or you're wrong for that. It's just not what we do. I'm sorry, it's not what we do. I will say this though, in NPUs where I know that people want, the leadership wants to be helped. And many of you have seen me in your NPUs. I will never speak in an NPU without first asking for the floor because that's proper parliamentary procedure. It's the right thing to do. It's not my meeting. I'm not a member there. So I always ask, Madam Chair or Mr. Chair, may I please speak or may I say something? And when they give me the floor, I will say what I can say. But I have no authority to make an NPU chair do anything aside from what the code requires of NPU chairs. That's it. So I've said that, Ms. Adams, I've said that a bunch of times. I really hope that this time it sinks in. And hopefully.
Let me just say, appreciate all that the city does for us to help us to get educated and how we should be able to utilize our power and our knowledge at these NPU meetings. So really what I'm hearing coming from you and the facilitator, that the NPU chair, in so many words, can do as they please and ignore the members unless the members really get power up and enforce these rules and bylaws and motions. So I never said I didn't appreciate it. It's just so confusing to say one thing and then you sit there and see how we be abused, verbally abused, cut off on the phone, and we have no power of saying anything. And I'm gonna leave it right there because I want this to go on. I'm gonna leave it right there because that's my opinion. And everybody who know me, know my opinion when it comes to the NPU, how we as members, and it all boils down to if the chairperson likes you or don't like you. And we've seen that. But to ignore us as a voting member, and I wish you had been at the forum last night when this guy brought it up about the NPUL to the candidates. So it's not just coming from L or me, it's coming from all over, and I know you know that. So I'm gonna leave it right there and thank you, but we got to know how to empower ourselves and not allow the chairperson to just take over and just act like we know that. Because if it weren't for us, you wouldn't have the NPUL.
Understood. And I will say this before we move on. Ms. Adams has been a very active member in the NPU system for a very long time, and we certainly appreciate all your contributions to your community and to the city. The NPU system just would not function without members, period, whether they are the members that call us a lot with problems or the members that don't. The system just doesn't function without you, period. So all of you are necessary parts. I just want to point out that the Zoom era that we live in does complicate what Dennis is teaching. In a pre-pandemic world, what he is saying is the solution, period. Like that's the solution. That's the answer. That's it. In a pre-pandemic world. now that we're all meeting virtually for however long we do, it does make things a bit more complicated when you're not the person that is controlling the Zoom account. I have seen NPU chairpersons removed from their own NPU meeting. And when you don't have control of the Zoom account, things like that can happen. So that's obviously not something that would happen in a pre-pandemic world, but it is something that can happen in a Zoom world. My point is that there are complications that come with meeting virtually. We are constantly working to address those complications and make them as decent as we can. I know that all of you here have specific questions that you want to ask related to your specific issues, but I don't want to take up the time for that now because Dennis is not ready for that just yet, but we do have time. The class ends at 9 o'clock. So we'll definitely have time to cover the more specific concerns that you all have. But were there questions related to what was covered in this previous section? I see hands raised. Are those related to what was covered in the previous section? I see you, Mr. Stewart. Ms. James, is yours related to what was covered in the previous section? All right, Mr. Stewart, go ahead, because I saw your response already. And Ms. Dent, I'm sorry, Ms. Dent, you were first. Go ahead, Ms. Dent.
I want to preface this by saying I'm not sure if it's a question and I guess a comment or suggestion about what was covered. From what was just said, would it be appropriate then for an NPU member to make a suggestion to amend the bylaws because of some of the issues that are going on?
I'll take that one, Dennis.
Okay.
Absolutely. So one thing I want to tell you is that I tell members this all over the city. This is going to sound familiar to the folks in English Avenue. They presented a problem to me, I think it was earlier this year or last year. And I said, well, why do you keep making suggestions? Make a motion. You can make suggestions for years, and it happens in NPUs all across the city. If it's a problem, don't make a suggestion, make a motion. Join the appropriate committee, do the work, and make the changes. So to answer your question very directly, Corrine, the answer is yes. Amending your bylaws is the way to go. I just shared that with Ms. Hill in the comments. In 2 ways, our NPU, the NPU where I live, changed our bylaws for 2 reasons. One is that NPU leaders are volunteers and you can't require them to get this training. So many of the issues that you all have is not ill will, it's a lack of knowledge. It's not because NPU leaders are out to do some, malicious stuff. It's because they don't know. And as volunteers, they have very active lives. Some of them have jobs and families and hobbies and church activities, et cetera. So they don't always have time to do trainings and nighttime classes. What we did in our NPU is we added to the bylaws a requirement that any elected officers have to attend at least, I think, 1 training if it is available to them and if it is free. That is one of the things that we did. And we also created a policy statement this year that limits the time spent on discussion. So no zoning item can take more than 10 minutes, or no report from city departments can take more than 3 minutes. And of course, as Dennis taught us in a previous class, the body has the right to amend that in the moment. So if a discussion needs to go on, someone can make a motion to extend that. But that is an example of members actually taking their power and saying, we don't like this, or this doesn't work for us, so we're going to change it by amending the bylaws. I hope that answered your question.
Let me add, Leah, quickly. See and read the process for changing your bylaws, and follow that process for amending the bylaws that's written down in that document. That would be important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. All right, Ms. James is ready. She had a mic problem, but she's got a question.
Thank you, Leah. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. I have two questions, quick questions. To Dennis's point of what he just taught, he was speaking of if a member has a motion and they're being ignored, does that also apply to if a member has a comment or concern that they want to address? Does it apply to those type things? And also, I did not know that this had been offered 4 times this year, because my next question was going to be, I've been on some of them, but I didn't know about this particular topic, was going to be if this could be done on a Saturday so as to afford the residents, more residents, an opportunity to tune in. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take the first one. I'll let Leah do the second one. The answer to the first question is this process that I described really goes based on a point of order. In other words, so let's say you want to speak to a motion and the chairperson is not letting you, then you call a point of order. And then the chairperson says, I'm not going to recognize you. That's too bad. Then you appeal the decision of the chair, and then that process begins that way. It's not just whether or not a motion is in order, whether or not an amendment is in order. It's any mistake that's made, you call a point of order and they ignore it, or you disagree with it. And it's okay to disagree with it, do it with kindness and respect. You disagree with it, just make the motion. And again, you can interrupt, just say, I appeal from the decision of the chair. And if somebody seconds it, that kicks that process into place. And in most cases, if the chairperson understands procedure, and the parliamentarian and the NPU, they understand procedure, they will process that appeal. And if they won't, that's when you are standing there, you do it 3 times and you insist, and then you put it to a vote yourself. And so that's an extreme move, but if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. And so it's any mistake that the chair might make, that's where that applies. And Leah, I'll let you take the second part of that.
I'm frozen. I can't answer that. I have no connection or something. Breaking up, you're breaking up. I can't hear you.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. That was a bad joke. That was a bad joke, because Ms. James already asked me that question, and now she's trying to put me on the spot.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize that I had already asked that for this parliamentarian class.
No, you asked about classes in general, and I do think it's a good idea. We'll have to continue to explore that. We operate on a small staff, as you can see, and yeah, it's a challenge. We'll continue to work on that. I can't promise that we'll. I'm looking at their faces, my team, and they don't look like they want to work on a Saturday. So I don't know. We'll figure it out, though. Seriously, we are working on that. We are.
Well, thank you.
Let me just say, Leah, after you did that to me at the beginning of the meeting, at the beginning of the class, I mentioned that I gave you $15. I want my money back.
It was actually 20, but okay. All right, Nick Stewart is Nick Stewart is up next. Mr. Stewart. Oh, I muted you. I'm sorry. I keep trying to lower the hands, and I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So a lot of the questions are starting to sound a little bit the same. So you guys are starting to answer it as it comes in. I appreciate what Dennis is doing. I appreciate what you're doing. So he just touched on something, because I got the idea. I appreciate that you guys are giving the system that shows that the members do have some sort of power. It seems like everybody's addressing what if you can't even, enact on this power that we have. And I'm using power loosely, but I just, just being able to speak out. Well, Dennis is saying that, if the chair ignores you or refuses to address you, which happens in our NPU, then there's an appeal process. But many of the meetings I've been to this year, and I can appreciate that Zoom is what's making it complicated. But many of the meetings I've been to this year, there could be several members all trying to do point of order. There could be several members trying to say, hey, hold on a second. And if you're gonna, it's not that you're just not acknowledging one person making a motion, you're going to ignore 7 people trying to make a motion or 7 people trying to make a point of order, to the point that we just start texting each other, hey, just give up. It doesn't matter. Like, there's nothing that we could do. So the appeal process can't even begin where you want to, challenge the denial of the motion, because you can't, that's not even going to be addressed. So
Right.
you can spend 2 or 3 meetings straight trying to handle the motion from three meetings ago. And there's just nothing that, by that point, you're just like, hey, let's just forget it. We'll just hope that when we get a new chair next year, maybe we'll do something. So the system, I admit that the system is great in person. I see how it will work in person. And I understand that we haven't caught up with the Zoom technology, but what is your recommendation for, can something happen outside of the meeting? Does everything have to happen within the meeting itself while the chair is running it to address something that's happening during that meeting? Because if I know ahead of time at the very next NPUL meeting, I'm not going to be acknowledged. All right, so I can go and I'll listen, but I won't raise my hand. I'm either going to get kicked out or I'm not going to be acknowledged. So I'm just there to watch. I'm a member of the community. What can I then do outside of the meeting? I get that the city can't take part. I get Leah is watching it and she can't take part. So I get all of that. So now what happens 6 months later or 7 months? What's the solution? And I don't know if that's what you wanted to wait to the end of the meeting to address, or if it still speaks to the part you were just talking about.
Yeah, this is something that Leah and Samantha and I discussed earlier about whether or not this nuclear option would come up. Robert's Rules of Order, the chapter that I just read from, is a chapter on discipline. And what this is doing is chapter 62 or section 62, pardon me. And what this is addressing is people that aren't cooperative and they're acting out, they're going against the rules in a meeting and causing problems, or going against the rules of the organization outside of a meeting and causing problems. And so what happens at that point, if the organization so chooses, what happens at that point is that there's a trial. If the organization decides it wants to conduct a trial and decide whether or not that leader or member needs to be removed from office or needs to be removed from membership. Now, when I talk about that, the NPUs, that's a different question because there's code and there's other things that come into play. So, but aside from that, unless Leah is familiar with some code that would prevent this, she's the expert in that area. I do procedures, she knows those other things. The organization can actually conduct a trial to decide whether or not the member should remain in office. And it's at the end of the book. It's the last chapter of the book. I'll not go into that process tonight in detail because it's complicated, but it is real.
But what I'm asking is, does that have to be done during the meeting? Remember, we're not going to be acknowledged or addressed. Our mic's not turning on. So I can't even make the motion to suggest the trial. Can I do it after the meeting? About emails behind, you know what I mean? Like, if we can't speak during the meeting, so raising our hand is not effective, making a motion not effective. What can I do outside to address the body? Hey, this is what I'm trying to do.
So you brought up I'm sorry, Nicholas, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. You're good.
You brought up an interesting factor in this, and really I just spotted it. Maybe I'm off a little bit. Help me if I am. So the real challenge here is the virtual meeting. That's the real challenge. And as I already pointed out, it's a good idea if the chairperson leadership, that people conducting the meeting, they're not in charge of that. So maybe that'll help. These principles that I'm providing here, people have to be aware of them. If you stood up in a meeting, or if you were if somebody who could speak in a meeting that the chair is going to let speak started bringing this stuff up and nobody understood it, then they would all be scratching their heads going, well, what are you doing?
Right.
Why, even if you're in the middle of a meeting in person and you stand up and you say, I'm going to say this 3 times, and on the 3rd time, everybody, you vote, they're going to be scratching their heads going, well, Nicholas, what are you doing? Where do you get that? And so you brought up emails. One of the things, since we're in a virtual environment, since this is all electronic anyway, one of the options might be is Nicholas or whoever else do a little bit of research, get the book, and send this information to people that would be interested and might want to get together and try to fix this. And that's a little bit of strength. I have to admit, I'm at a loss somewhat in a virtual environment is because when you've got the guy with the switch who's making all of the decisions, and you can't, if you're in a room, you know, everybody can stand up and say, excuse me, Mr. Smith. Mm-hmm. You know, you can't do that in this room. This is our meeting, it's not yours. And if you're in person, and if you're running a meeting, all of a sudden you have the whole room stand up on you and say, you can't do that. That's effective. Mm-hmm. That is effective. But when we're talking about virtual meetings, goodness, you know, the email, just inform everybody, this is our meeting, and, you know, maybe get them to come to these classes. Nicholas, I'm embarrassed. I wish I could do more.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate what you're doing. In fact, what I'm taking out of this is I run an association myself, and I'm no longer going to make sure I'm not in charge of the Zoom meeting. I think what you said, I think a lot of us believe, hey, we're running it. Let me sign into the Zoom account. I set it up. I pay for the cloud. I do all the other stuff. But I guess you're right. Someone else should be able to keep track of who raised their hands or who's making motions. So it's not, you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It shouldn't just be one person.
I think that's a nice start, maybe a significant one. It's an idea.
Right. Yeah, I like that idea. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. And I will have you know, Dennis is at a loss, as he said, but I actually just sent a note to Tony to ask. I had an idea, and I'm vetting it with Tony, and we'll see if that might be a good idea. But I think we might be able to come up with something that can help as it relates to the Zoom world for the short term. So stay tuned for that. We'll see if that might work out. Ms. Martin, you're up next, and then Ms. James, and then Dennis, you've got more content, right?
I do have some more that I think it'll be helpful. It's just more things that talk about the options that the voting membership has if they run into a snag. So yeah,
that's important. So yeah, let's hear quickly from Ms. Martin and Ms. James, and then we'll get back into the course material.
So thank you very much for conducting the meeting, Dennis and Leah. Really appreciate it. Leah, you had mentioned, and I think Dennis did also, amending the bylaws. And then Dennis had stated that NPU leadership isn't required to take the courses like these that are offered by the NPU University. Is it possible to amend the bylaws for the NPU where the incoming leadership, when we vote for the new chair and all that stuff, can we amend our bylaws so that it is a requirement that whatever the core classes are, like this one in particular, that they be required for our NPU leadership?
Yeah, that's what I was saying, actually. I said that one of the NPUs did amend their bylaws to require.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, because they're not speaking on a specific incident, but I'm pretty sure it's happening in other incidents where motions to oppose a vote were made and that was incorrect. And rather than the chair or the parliamentarian correct or help correct the motion, they just made a fuss about people not knowing how to make a motion. And so it was, to me, came across as just trying to embarrass people rather than be helpful and actually use it as a teachable moment to teach people about how the process works.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ms. James.
Yes, I unmuted myself early this time. I have a question to Dennis's point of saying that the members, if they want to get together because they're not being recognized by the chair in the meeting, can send emails. But what happens if you've requested emails of voting members and that request is consistently ignored by members of your NPU?
So Ms. James, that gets into one of those specific kind of questions, and we're gonna cover those at the end, okay? If you don't mind. All right, thank you. All right, Dennis, let's get to this last part so these people can get their burning questions out. They came for a reason.
All right, yeah, well, and I hope it's helping. I hope it's helping.
It is very helpful so far. Thank you.
Well, good. I enjoy these meetings because everybody's so interested and the discussions they're great. I'm on page 7. And again, this is just some areas where you need to know that you have the authority to make these decisions. And I'm looking at the motion that has to do with voting on page 7. It's up to the assembly if in the default approach is a voice vote, which means the chair would say all in favor say aye, or please say yes, and then they say aye or yes, all opposed say no. That's the common approach. That's, you know, you can usually tell in most common votes whether or not the ayes had it or not. There may be a sentiment in the room that it should be done by ballot. You have the authority as members to make a motion. It would be, I move that this vote be taken by ballot, second. And if a vote is pending, it's not debatable. I make a motion that this vote be done by ballot, second. All in favor say aye, aye, and all opposed no. And if the ayes have it, then that vote must be taken by ballot. That is in your hands as voting members. If you're concerned about it, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because sometimes people are concerned about what others are going to think about their vote. You may be hearing a lot of negative input about a particular issue, but you're thinking, no, I think it's okay. But man, I'm going to get mobbed if I vote yes. And so you might stand up and say, you know, this is better done secretly by ballot. And by the way, you can't just stand up and say, I move that we vote by ballot. You have to be recognized by the chair, just like any other motion. So you raise your hand or stand, recognized by the chair, and you say, Mr. Chairman or Madam Chair, I move that we conduct this vote by ballot. Second, and then once that's done, the chairperson does need to process that. In other words, it's been properly moved and seconded. This vote take place by ballot. All in favor say aye, aye, etc. And if the ayes have it, then the vote on the liquor license, for example, would be done by ballot. And that's helpful sometimes, especially in a heated discussion. Also, at the bottom of the page, and I'm not going through all of these because not all of these would come up very often. For example, a division of the assembly, you're not going to be worrying about that typically. Some of the organizations maybe, but typically not an NPU. So at the very bottom of number 7, if you have a question about procedure, you have the right to stand up. And remember, we're looking at a chart. And the chart, when we're talking about an inquiry, that's the very bottom of the chart. And there's a little I there under interrupt. That means you can stand up and you can say, and the chair, or however you get the chair's attention, right when somebody's talking, you can raise your hand, you can stand up and say, and the chair should recognize you and say, for what purpose does the member rise? That's the technical term. But you know, in an NPU, yeah, Bob, what do you want? You know, so that's okay. So Bob stands up and says, I have a parliamentary inquiry, a parliamentary question. That's legitimate. The member who was speaking needs to sit down until the inquiry is dealt with. And then the member may say, it's been the member's been talking for 13 minutes. Don't we have a 10-minute limit? You know, I mean, maybe that's the question. But if you're concerned about procedure, you have the right, and be careful about it, because you may come across, if you do it too much, you'll come across as just trying to interrupt things and cause problems. So be careful with it. But it's legitimate. If you have a legitimate parliamentary question, to stand up in the middle of somebody's speech and say, I do have a procedural question, and they need to give you the answer. They need to answer that for you. So again, this is just another example of the rights that you have as a voting member of the organization. Let's suppose that, and on page, it's not numbered, but it's actually page 8. And it's a chart, it's the last chart. We won't go over all of these, but there is one motion that I'll talk about. And so I've got the chart in front of me, and I've got page 9. And on page 9, on the second motion, it's a motion to rescind or amend something previously adopted. So what that has to do with, and it shows up on the chart, it's the second one down. And these aren't in order of rank either, just that first chart, the 13 motions that start with the main motion at the bottom. That's the only chart where there's a ranking involved. So this second motion down, rescind or amend something previously adopted. Let's suppose that at the last meeting, the organization voted on something and you didn't like it. It's as simple as that. You didn't think the organization should have voted that in. If there's not a third party involved, in other words, if there wasn't a contract that was signed that involved a third party, if it's just a motion that could easily be changed without involving a third party, I don't know if I'm being clear about that, you have the right to make a motion to rescind or to amend the motion that was previously adopted. And it's not just at the last meeting. It could be a motion that was moved 2 years ago, that was established 2 years ago. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is just another example. This is something that most organizations, most members of organizations don't recognize that they have this ability. And now, again, a third party can't be involved. You can't, you know, if the organization voted to demolish the building next door that they owned and it's been done, well, you can't really back that up. You can't change that. But anything that's changeable where a third party is not involved or physical reversal is impossible, you can reverse it, you can change it or amend it. You have the authority to do that. So here's how it works. If the organization, if you want to change something that's been voted on by the organization and approved it, if you give notice, then at the next meeting, it'll only take a majority vote. It goes something like this. Let's say the organization, oh, I gotta find something that's, I'm trying to shoot from the hip here. And so I'm just gonna go ahead and use remodeling the office space, if you don't mind. Let's suppose the organization, it's January and the organization said in June, we're gonna remodel the office space. And so that's voted on in January. In February, you say, I want to give notice that at the next meeting in March, I'm going to make a motion that we rescind that we vote that back down. You have that authority. You give notice, it's on record, it goes into the minutes. And if you give notice, then with a majority vote, you can vote to rescind it. You can cancel it if the body wants to. You know, in other words, you would have to have your ducks in a row. You'd have to have some evidence, some new evidence that they didn't know yet, or maybe you didn't get a chance to talk the last time or something. Who knows what? But the point is, sometimes organizations do that. Things change. You have the authority to do that. If you didn't get a chance to give notice, then it's a 2/3 vote. Then it's a 2/3 vote. And so, in other words, if I show up at the February meeting and I want to change what was voted on in the January meeting. And I'm just thinking I'm going to do it right here from the hip. And I stand up, I get the chair's attention, and I say, I make a motion that we rescind that decision to remodel the office complex in June. And then there's a second. And then it can be amended and it's debatable, but it would take a 2/3 vote. If I didn't give notice, it would take a 2/3 vote if I brought it up at that meeting for the first time to rescind it or to amend it. So I want you to know that's in your authority. This is your organization as a voting membership. And so what I'm going to do, Leah, quickly, before we take on any more questions, I show this book. I don't know if you can see it. This is Robert's Rules of Order in brief. The book that I study is 632 pages of semi-fine print. This is just me. I mean, that's just what I do. And I don't expect, one of the members in the meeting tonight talked about how it's a little bit confusing. Well, it can be, and I recognize that. The book that I'm holding up right now is called Robert's Rules of Order in brief, and it's an abridged version, and it just goes over the basics. And it's very well written, and it's very well done, and it will help somebody just starting out to learn procedure and to help understand it a lot more easily than what we're doing tonight. These courses cover a lot of material. That's why I provide the handouts, and that's why we allow for questions and so on. And I can safely say, because I've had folks share this with me, if they attend a number of the meetings, they begin to really understand the process. It just takes a number of sessions to really start to get it. But again, this is something you can do on your own. And if you're going to be a chairperson, and if you're going to be a parliamentarian, I would highly recommend, and I would even go so far as to say, how come you're not studying this book? If you're a chairperson, or if you're a parliamentarian in an NPU or an organization, why aren't you studying this book so that you know how to conduct the meeting in a fair way? Because that's what this does. That's what parliamentary procedure does. It's all about fairness and equity for a deliberative body. If the chairperson has become, and I don't know how to say, I'm trying to be nice. I never want to be unkind, but maybe I can't be kind here. If a chairperson is not going to obey the rules and give the authority, understandably give the authority to the body where it belongs, and instead of trying to be a dictator, then I can't help but to ask the question, how does such a person get voted back in? If there's no opportunity to call the point of order, if there's no opportunity to appeal the decision of the chair for whatever reason, whatever circumstances, and we're trying to work through some of that with the virtual meeting setting and so on. These are challenging experiences, but if this chairperson won't listen to reason and recognize that there's a procedure that he or she must follow, and that the assembly has the final say, the voting assembly by majority vote, if they won't hear that, then they would only make sense to me that they don't win the next election. It would only make sense to me. And if they do, all I can do is scratch my head and say, well, I guess it'll be more of the same for the next term. That's all I have for my handouts, Leah.
All right, thank you. I was actually typing in a response to Ms. Walker's question. She wanted to know when they are getting their books from previous classes. We are not back in the office yet, just FYI. We're not back at City Hall, I should say, but Tony did confirm a couple of weeks ago that the books have arrived. They were on a serious delay or back order or something. It took us forever to get those books, but we do have them. So anyone, those of you who are attending for the first time may not know this, but we give a copy of Robert's Rules to every student who attends our parliamentary procedures class. We have both versions because Dennis recommends the the brief version because the big one is big and it does overwhelm. It is truly, my Bible is right here. I use it like daily. I mean, daily. I really do use it daily. But we have both. So we have the brief version for those that prefer that, and we have the full version as well. I am going to ask Samantha to lower her screen, please. And I know, so here's what I'd like to do, y'all, if you guys are okay with this. We have 30 minutes left before this class is over. I don't even need to hear your questions because I know what they are. So what I'm going to ask is that those of you that have questions, if someone from your NPU has already asked that question, can you please, just not, because we only have 30 minutes. So I know that there were questions from NPUR or related to NPUR. I saw Mr. Martin had a question related to NPUR. I know there were questions from NPUI. I know there were questions from NPUL, but I think those were already answered. We spent a lot of time on L. So Ms. James, your hand is up and we'll take all the other questions in the order that you raised your hand. But again, if your question has already been asked, please just allow us the time to get through any other hands that are raised. Ms. James?
Yes, and I did have that previous question, but to Dennis's question as to how a chair might get voted back in, sometimes if the vote is, or the voting procedure is directly or indirectly being handled by the chair, that's how they can get back in. Or if they're saying nobody wants this job, which tends to sway people who might want a chance at trying it. And if they're saying this job is so hard, nobody wants it, that can tend to sway people who may want to give it a shot in answer to that particular question that you had. And then if before this is over, if you all can address my previous question. I wrote it down, but I can't remember where it is.
You remember, because I forgot, Miss James. I'm sorry, I definitely forgot. Do you remember it? Or did you come back to you?
If
Ms. James, let me speak to a little. Let me provide a little bit of help for what you just provided, for what you just explained and described. And I get that. There's a dynamic that takes place, and I'm aware of that. What some organizations do because of what you just described is they put a time limit. In other words, not a time limit, but a term limit. An organization would say, you can only serve in office as an officer for 2 terms. Each term is a year. After that, you can't serve anymore. You got to take a year or 2 off. And so that's one of the mechanisms that an organization will do to help with that concern, with that dynamic.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully those organizations don't have a leader that's saying that they can stay in for a lifetime. But my other question was I think it was Mr. Stewart asked, can anything be done on the outside of the meetings? And you had suggested emails, and I brought the point out that people may ask for the emails of the voting members, but never get those email addresses. So what would you suggest if that is the case?
Say it again. Say that last part again.
Yes, I was asking, what would you suggest if the case is that members have asked for email addresses of voting members and they're ignored about that? So when Mr. Stewart was saying, is there anything that can be done outside of meetings if they're continuously ignored, and you suggested emails, but what if you requested emails and you're just ignored? What do you suggest the members do then?
Unless the code or the rules involved with NPUs is different, you do have the right to ask for information, contact information. You should be able to get that. And if that's not available, maybe you can look up a phone number online and say, it takes some work, but can I I've got your phone number. Can I get your email address? Because I think we need to communicate a little bit about how to move forward in a more effective way with our NPU. And again, I'm shooting from the hip here. I really am, because the virtual environment has already been stated by me, I know probably too many times, it's just made it so there's more challenges than I would have predicted. But if you are able to make phone calls, and that's legitimate, by the way, let me say that, because I have to point that out. It's okay to talk to each other outside of a meeting. You can't make anything official, but it's okay to talk to each other before you come to the meeting and talk an issue over, and so on. But be informed. In other words, if you're going to send an email saying the chair should or shouldn't have done that, have your information. Have the quote or the page or the section showing that can or can't happen. And what will begin to take place, I'm predicting now, if you're able to get that information and do the emails and so on, what will begin to take place is now what you're doing is you're learning procedure, because people are looking it up themselves and they're shooting back an email and so on. And again, I apologize, I'm shooting from the hip, but the virtual environment is a real challenge. I think Leah earlier had said that she has an idea and she's going to talk to Tony. Maybe there's something that can be done.
Okay. Yes, because
I just want to say, Tony shot my idea down, but he promised that we could talk about it in our team meeting tomorrow. So
Okay.
we'll discuss that further. I do want to just ask everybody, it's 8:38. We've got 22 minutes. We've got questions. Please keep the commentary limited, and yeah, just keep the commentary.
Okay.
You don't want to.
I'll try to be more brief as
We don't
well.
want to throw shade or anything tonight. All right, Miss Billingsley, and then Mr. Ziegler or Zeigler.
Anyone's accepted.
Thank you.
Well, can everybody hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, my question is about the voting by ballot. And when votes are done by ballots, I'm not going to even ask about how that may be transferred to a virtual environment, but in a real environment, when a vote is taken by ballot, who counts the ballots and when, and who assumes responsibility for communicating the results of the vote?
That depends on the bylaws. Quick answer,
Okay,
right,
that
Dennis?
is something-
Does that cover it, Dennis? Bylaws.
They may or may not. Bylaws.
And Robert's rules, bylaws and Robert's rules.
Robert's rules. So the quick answer is that, and again, there's a lot of trust that goes on here. The quick answer is the chair would appoint tellers, and it's good to have 2 or 3, not just one person. The chair would appoint tellers. Those tellers would count the votes and report back to the chair. The chair would announce it. And so that's assuming that everybody's behaving themselves. If the chair picks tellers that it's his buddies, and the chair is gonna not play fair. And I hate talking like that, because I always want to give people the benefit of the doubt. Remember, the organization belongs to the voting body. The voting body can say, we're going to elect the tellers. And somebody make a motion, I move that we choose so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so to be the tellers, and I second it, and so on. And again, it just depends on the membership getting involved and taking the initiative and learning procedure, but that's the approach.
All right, Mr. Ziegler.
Yes, good evening. Yeah, good evening. How you doing? Correct me if I'm wrong. On the part about the email, it is totally illegal to email anybody if they don't want to be emailed. You can't just send something to the email address. That is illegal.
I don't know about that. I get emails I don't want all the time. More and more emails from organizations advertising to me.
That's where the spam comes in at. See, they call that spam.
I've got a spam blocker.
Yeah, well, they're calling that spam, and you just can't email somebody Just the
Well, I don't
email.
know. I mean, like I said, I
Usually,
don't know the answer
right.
to that question.
Usually, if somebody asks you like a business, can I email you? You know, that's the purpose of asking
I
that
got
question.
emailed by ABC and CBS today, and they
And
didn't
those
ask
are-
my permission.
Yeah, those are spam emails. They're just,
All
you
right.
know.
Is that it, Mr. Ziegler? Is that
Yes,
your
that's
question?
it. Mhm.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to take a couple from the chat before we go back to Ms. Billingsley for another question. There were a bunch in the chat while you were talking. Can the appeal, this came up when you were talking about appealing the ruling of the chair and all of that, and then the chairperson not acting in good faith, et cetera. Can the appeal be challenged before a higher tribunal or in the Fulton County Superior Court under the Administration Procedure Act appeal process?
Well, good question. I'm not an attorney.
Me either.
But yeah, so let me describe. I'll try to be brief, Leah. So I'm going to go back to the organization leasing the building that says you can't make any physical changes, and so the person makes the motion. I move that we remodel. The chair says, and it's seconded. The chair says, I'm calling that out of order. You can't do that because our lease says you can't do that. So I'm calling that out of order. The member says, point of order. I think we can. And the chair says, no, you can't because of the lease. And then a member says, I appeal the decision of the chair, and they go through that process. And the chair loses the vote. And the lease clearly says that there can be no physical changes by this organization to the facilities, but the chair lost the vote. And so the organization decides, we're going to get a sledgehammer, we're going to start tomorrow. Well, what now? The point here is that if the organization is going to make a mistake, in a republic structure. In other words, if the board runs things, then governing documents say that, then that's the case. But if the voting membership has the final say in the organization, if the organization is going to make a mistake, it's the membership's mistake to make. Was I clear about that? Do you know what I mean by that? If the organization is going to make a mistake, it's not the chair's, it's not on the chair's shoulders. He's been appealed. He lost the appeal. It's the voting membership that made the decision to go ahead and remodel the office space when the lease said you can't. Well, who's accountable to that? The voting membership. And if there's going to be a lawsuit, then the voting membership is going to end up having to answer for their decision and for their actions. If I was chairing a meeting, and I've shared this before, if I was chairing a meeting where that happened, and that, by the way, that's an extreme example, but it just goes to the fact that the organization is responsible for itself. That's where the authority lies. If I was chairing a meeting and I got voted down on something I knew was illegal, I would resign on the spot. I would process the motion, and then I would say, I resign as your chair, and I might even resign as a member. If this organization is going to conduct itself that way, I don't want to be a part of it, and thank you, and I'm done. But that's an extreme example just to make the point that the chair can't hold his breath and kick and hit the table and say, you can't do that. And I know you can't do that. It's illegal. So I'm not going to, who has the final say? The voting membership.
So one other, okay, I'm going to remind everyone to please keep your microphone. Okay, please keep your microphones muted unless you've been called on to speak. So one of the questions that came in the chat before that one is the issue in NPUR, not my NPU, is when and where a legit meeting is called.
Depends on the bylaws. The bylaws should, it's very, very important, and it's vital even that the bylaws describe when the meetings will take place, when special meetings can take place, who can call special meetings, and how to process that. The bylaws should give that information. The reason for that is because and the bylaws aren't really good bylaws if they don't describe that, because otherwise you could have a majority of the board members, for example, sitting a Waffle House and saying, well, I know this isn't a real meeting, but we got a quorum here, we got a majority, we'll just decide right here. That's not legal. You can't do that. It has to be held in a legitimate meeting where everybody's been informed that the meeting is there. All the voting members have been informed that the meeting is there at that time and have an opportunity to be there by the organization. So that's very, very important. You can't just decide things on the fly because a lot of the people are there.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Miss Billingsley, what was your question?
I already asked. It was about counting the ballots.
Okay. All right. I
yeah.
thought I had lowered your hand. I'll lower it now. Okie dokie. If I don't want my email given out, is it my understanding that it can be given out anyway? No.
I misspoke. There is a let me explain. I work with nonprofits, and as a parliamentarian, I have to be aware of state law where it comes to nonprofit law, because nonprofit law modifies parliamentary law at a number of points, and I have to be aware of that. If I'm working with a nonprofit and I tell them something out of Robert's Rules of Order, but the state has provided something different, I can get in trouble. So when I said that, and I apologize, I'm not an attorney, but there are laws that address that, whether or not you can get information, membership information. There are laws that address that. And when I said that, that was something I shouldn't have said. So the email information, I don't know whether it's illegal for somebody to get an email when they're not supposed to. Maybe the gentleman was right, but that's freely given. That's not required to be handed out.
All right. So we're about 10 minutes from closing. No, I can give you 10 minutes back. We don't have to drag it out 10 minutes if there are no other questions. So this is the last call for questions. And then Samantha, I believe, is going to close us out if there aren't any. Chandra Jones Foster has a question.
Yes, I had one quick question. If there is something that's not on the agenda or something that the membership wants to discuss, even if the chair thinks that it should not be discussed, can the membership still make a motion and discuss something?
So that's a very good question. I just worked with an organization where their bylaws say that you have to submit things that you want to bring up to the staff, to the presiding officer, a certain amount of time in advance. And if you don't do it, then it won't be on the agenda. And if it's not on the agenda, then it won't be discussed. I informed the organization that even though their bylaws read that way, because it's a procedural matter, and it's kind of complicated, and I apologize, because it's a procedural matter, by a 2/3 vote, even though the bylaws say you have to have that in by a certain time, by a 2/3 vote, you can bring up a particular item. In other words, you say, I want to bring up this particular item, and I move that I can. I want to suspend the rules. There's a second. It's not debatable. It's not amendable, and the vote passes by a 2/3 vote. Okay, now I can make that motion I wanted to make. So if that's a case where the bylaws are clear, you can't bring anything up unless you do it ahead of time. In most cases, even though there's an agenda that's prepared, unless the governing documents state otherwise, the bylaws, there should be a spot for new business. And in that category, when that category comes up, a chairperson typically will say, is there any new business? And in that category, you can bring up anything that's legitimate, that's not illegal, that's not absurd, and so on, as long as it's second and it can be processed, if the governing documents don't provide something different.
I want to piggyback on that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, Ms. Foster. I want to piggyback on that just because of context. So typically NPU meetings on average are about 2 hours. Some of them are significantly less than that and can wrap up in an hour and 15 minutes or so. Actually, I've seen one that was 45 minutes long last year. I remember that. And then some of them I've been in NPU meetings that have lasted 5 hours, not very long ago either. In fact, Tony and I were in one not long ago that lasted 5 hours. So I will say this, and Dennis actually taught a class on this as well. We had a parliamentary procedures class that covered, I don't remember what the topic was, but you covered in that class committee work. Let me just pull from what he's saying, and that is that it is so important that you understand the purpose of a committee and the work that takes place at a committee meeting or an informational meeting or a special meeting, et cetera. NPU business meetings are not typically the place to dig deeply into applications and vet them very thoroughly. That is 9 times out of 10 done at a zoning committee. In fact, that's the purpose of the committee. The committee's purpose, as I learned from Dennis, is to vet these applications, to do all the research, to ask all of the questions, to dig really deeply and prepare to make a recommendation to the body. The folks that are not participating in the committee meeting you could assume that those are the folks that are just going to trust the recommendation of the zoning committee. Because if you want to dig deeply for yourself, you will attend the zoning committee meeting or whatever the committee is, land use or an informational session, depending on how your NPU does it. It is not advisable. I want to make clear that those meetings that have those really long 4 hours, 5 hours, et cetera, they're not long because they're vetting an application. They're long because they've got 20 applications on their agendas, typically. If you have 1 item on your agenda or 2 items or 3 items, your meeting should not be 3 hours long. Because the work should be done at the committee level or at an informational session, et cetera. The other thing is that it's a little different with city rules. And I don't want to get too deeply into that just because I don't want to be quoted. Well, I don't want to say the wrong thing and be quoted. But here's what I am comfortable saying. It's not a good idea to vote on an application that is not on your agenda. That is highly inadvisable. Definitely not a good idea to vote on an application that is not on your agenda. So even if a member of the organization or the NPU is to make a motion in new business around an application or something like that, it's definitely not a good idea to do that. I highly advise against that. It'll backfire.
And thank you for those clarifications, Leah. And again, when it comes to content, I'm a bit naive when it comes to the actual content. I'm dealing primarily with procedure. And so I don't know the culture as well as, and that's why I'm glad Leah and Samantha and Tony and everybody's here who can help me with those things. I'll speak from strictly a procedural standpoint unless it's modified. And what Leah is describing is a modification of procedure, which is why there's bylaws. There are a number of organizations who would provide that if a motion comes to the floor under new business of a certain category, it automatically goes to committee. And their bylaws will provide that just because of time, just because there has to be research, et cetera. So it's a matter of structuring your organization. But as a default position, new business is new business. And
yes, and this is Chandra. I was not talking about a vote. I was just talking about general discussion. Can we discuss issues that may not have been addressed, that may not be on the agenda under the new business? Even if it does relate to something that will come to a vote. I just wanted to make sure from a parliamentary procedure standpoint that I understood the rules.
Okay, so
thank you very much.
Well, and thank you.
When you say discussion, you mean like discussion on a top, like what kind of topic? Because I actually would want to hear.
Why don't I meet you, or I will call you and we can go over this offline. I'm not going to hold the whole meeting. just for
Well, I can speak
clarification
to it
on that.
briefly. I can
Mhm.
speak to it briefly.
So we're gonna move on from that, but I am gonna ask Dennis that question, because if you call me, Ms. Foster, I'm not gonna know the answer. So I'm gonna have to ask Dennis, which is why I was continuing with that line of questioning. I know what my answer would be, but I'm not a registered parliamentarian. So I don't know that, hold on, Ms. Foster, we're not gonna have a conversation about it. I just wanna know from Dennis.
The answer is no.
I didn't think so.
You can't go into a conversation, a casual conversation, just about a subject that you know is going to come up, unless the body votes and says we'll go ahead. It's called going into committee of the whole, quasi committee of the whole, or let's discuss informally. So there is a motion to be made to do that, but still the chair has to moderate and make sure that it doesn't get out of hand. And but the plain answer is you can't discuss something that's not first moved and seconded. You can't enter into discussion. So you might say, I move that we go into committee of the whole and talk about this thing that's going to come up. Second,
An informal discussion, correct?
an informal discussion.
Okay.
But the chair really needs to keep control of that. It is a legitimate motion. It's a legitimate move, but the chair really needs to keep control of that and not let it drift and not let it keep going in circles. And then if I was chairing a meeting and that began to happen, I would bring that to everybody's attention. And I would say, I think the discussion has gone full course. And you might want to make a motion to go back into normal rules. So that you can do it, but the majority has to agree to it.
Understood. Thank you.
All right. I would be remiss if I didn't just point out that some of these questions are tricky because Dennis doesn't have context, and I don't want anyone to have expectations of an NPU meeting based on misinformation, or have expectations of the NPU chairperson or even a neighborhood association's presiding officer that's based on misinformation because of a lack of context. So I would just caution against that, because I don't want anybody to be disappointed or think that a presiding officer is doing something out of order when the city has its own procedures and policies around some of these discussions as well. So keep that in mind. Mr. Ziegler, you have the last question, and then we're going to wrap up. So last question coming from Mr. Ziegler, and then Samantha.
Yes, mine is about the book. How do you go about getting the Robert's Rules of Law book?
I
don't
love
understand.
That. That's a nice, quick, and easy question. I'll take that one. So Tony, jump in if I'm wrong, but I believe the team is preparing to mail those out. I will tell you, yes, that's right, mail. Yes, okay, so they're going to be mailed out, but I will tell you that we owe people books from the beginning of the year, from the first parliamentary procedures class. There's a really, really long list of people who have completed these classes, so it could take a while for us to get them packaged, addressed, and mailed out, but you'll get it in the mail.
Oh, so there's nothing I have to do personally?
Tony, no?
No, I think we'll, if we don't have your information, we'll reach out to you and get your emails. I will reach out to you via email and get your mailing address and that sort of thing, so we can send it to you.
And everyone that did
appreciate that.
registration for Zoom on for today's course, it asked for your address. So that address that you put down is what we're using.
Okay.
It did ask for my address. Thank you. That's right. All right, we're good. Dennis, thank you so much. Do you have anything else you want to add in closing before Samantha dismisses us?
I'll just say this. I sympathize with the challenges that you're going through as members. granting that the chair people are they mean well, they're just not informed. Just be patient and maintain respect and don't give up. Just keep trying to do what you can in a gentle and cautious way to move in the direction where the membership does have respectfully has the final say in all of its own affairs.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And as always, thank you so much for teaching this doggone class. You always do such an amazing job. I look forward to, I think we're starting all over with Parliamentary Procedures 1. For those of you that missed them earlier this year, we're doing it again in 2022. And I think the first one is, I know it's before February, Tony said, so it's early next year. And we'll start all over again and we'll just keep learning this stuff. So we look forward to seeing you then, Samantha. And then I just want to say, while Sam is doing her spiel, after we close out here and stop recording and stop streaming, I'll stick around for a few minutes if any of you have some challenges that we can help with, perhaps. I'm gonna see how that goes. I may stick around for a few minutes. We'll see. Last time I offered that, it was a struggle, but we'll see. Go ahead, Sam.
Okay, so thank you everyone for participating in this course today. Many of you may have received the survey or the evaluation that went out a little earlier, asking that you please complete it so that we can make our courses better. Our course registration for our 2022 classes will open in January, so just please stay close to npuatlanta.org to be updated, as well as following our social media. Technology hates me. Okay. Follow us on social media at NPU Atlanta. That's on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And on Nextdoor, City of Atlanta Neighborhood Planning Units. And those of you that are hanging out with Leah, feel free. That's it for me.
That's Samantha's way of saying, I'm not hanging out. Good night, team. Daniel, Tony, Sam, thank y'all so much for being here. You can definitely log off. And anybody else who doesn't have any other questions, you can log off. Dennis, you're officially off the clock, so you can log off.
Thank you, everybody. I thoroughly enjoyed it.